What's the best "welcome to the real world" moment that hit a spoilt rich kid? I grew up with rich kids and still keep in touch with a few of them. One guy's father owned the most prestigious law firm in town. He said his life changed the moment he called his father from jail the second time it happened. His father said, "Well, sorry to hear you got arrested, good luck," and then hung up. He said getting locked back into his cell was the singular moment that completely turned his life around. I knew this rich kid from high school that went off to college and partied every single night. His parents found out that he was basically failing all of his classes, so they secretly drove up early one Saturday morning with a spare set of keys to the car they'd bought him and just drove off with the car. Somewhat distant relatives spent all of his university years and 20s partying hard with the $100 to $120K allowance his rich company-owning father gave him each year. He'd travel the world each year going to Bali, Thailand, Europe, every year Oktoberfest, just rampaging, and at 32 or so he decided to settle an upscale ski resort area of the US and open a business with his hot gold-digger fiancée. When he went to transfer his money to his US bank account, he noticed it only came to a few $1,000s. Angrily asked the bank worker why she hadn't transferred the entire amount, only to be told that that was the entire amount. His father had cut him off without saying anything, and he just hadn't noticed. Absolute flatline. Rich guy in our college dorm thought he was untouchable because his dad was some NFL player from the 90s and had not blown all of his money yet. He'd get freshman girls blackout drunk and then film himself doing the deed with them, and then show all of his buddies the next day or so. Well, one buddy was not as close as he thought and went to the residential advisor, who then went to the campus police and then the real police. It was a fun night watching the parking lot fill up with the bored cops on duty that night, and haul his butt out of the dorms while they went and gathered his evidence. Never saw him after that night. This took place near the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, because I remember going to class on Monday and his dorm was empty and being cleaned out by the housekeeping staff. Yuck. Well deserved. Look, say what you will about most people born with silver spoons in their butts, most of them don't seem to do this. But don't worry, there's plenty of other things to be annoyed about them for. That one Instagram model who got caught on video talking crap to a security guard at VidCon, not only did the guard stand his ground and not let him in because he wasn't famous enough to be given a pass and too rich to just buy one, but once the internet saw the video, the guard ended up having more followers than the kid. My classmate in college failed his course, partied for a year with daddy's money, never studied, ever. The thing is, inheriting his father's construction company, 2 quarries, a fleet of trucks and equipment, depended on him manning up and passing the class. All he had to do was learn the basics of mechanical diagnostic and repair and be set for life. I had a roommate my freshman year of college that came from an incredibly rich oil family from the Middle East. I remember him having the hardest time adjusting to not having someone else prepare him food. I remember waking up one morning and going to the kitchen and seeing him try to eat eggs and toast he had just prepared himself. He asked me how I normally prepare fried eggs because his tasted really crunchy. Turns out he'd just cracked the egg whole into the pan and prepared it shell and all. I couldn't stop laughing, but I felt really bad for the guy. He was actually a pretty good dude. It was an interesting semester helping him learn how to live providing for himself. I knew a guy in high school who bragged that he didn't have to pay attention in school because, get this, his grandfather was vice president of the corporation that supplied the cardboard for cereal boxes for General Mills. Real gravy train, you know. Last I checked, I've since deleted Facebook, he was still working at Best Buy 5 years after high school. It was the same job he'd had in high school too. My best moment was when I got hired by a pair of Woodside, California parents to transition their horrible 18-year-old into the realities of real life, something that evaded both of them. My first action was to take away his platinum limitless credit cards. He threw a tantrum that lasted several days. "Where am I going to get the money?" "Well, you get a job. My parents will fire you." They didn't. When he realized that boundaries and budgets had been set in stone and that he not only had to pay the bills, the rent, but taxes too, he headed straight to college to wait out the next 4 years. He's still a complete jerk, but at least he has a job and an education now. Okay, how does one get into your line of work? That sounds really fun. I was the nanny while working through my PDD, so I came to it indirectly. There's a whole workforce of people who do this. It's word of mouth and next door. My favourite moment had to be on the BBC when Prince Andrew got the crap kicked out of him for an hour about his sordid deeds. Well deserved, but if it was a really just world, he'd be in prison. One of my college roommates told his parents the trip we were planning, that they were paying for, was $400 more expensive than it was so that he could buy a really nice substance smoking apparatus. In addition, they basically paid for everything he wanted. He had their credit card and ordered food on it at least once daily. He'd make $50 purchases off the card all the time. Long story short, they found out he lied about the cost of the trip. For whatever reason, they still paid and let him go, but after the trip, he just couldn't use their card anymore. This guy acted like he lived the hardest life of all time after that, but eventually sucked it up. He actually acts way less entitled now. It ended up having a lasting positive effect on him, even though he wouldn't admit it. While working in a casino here in Las Vegas, a herd of girls came up to my window, and one proceeded to tell me about her great birthday party itinerary that her dad had paid for her 18th birthday, with no adult in the party, just a bunch of teenage girls out in Vegas, where none of them could do anything because none of them were 21. I couldn't even check them into their reservation. They started yelling and screaming at me, and I calmly called security. And security told them that they could either go play in the arcade or leave and try to find a hotel off the strip that will take them in without being 21. Their anger turned to tears, and the security guard was unmoved. Was at a Starbucks, and this lady apparently thought that people gave her parents free drinks and such for her after all this time. Like the cashier told her the total and she said, "Wait, I don't get it for free?" She never realized her parents swiping their cards all those years was paying for her things, I guess. A favorite family story is when my uncle called him from the police station on a Friday night. He was in high school at the time and got caught drinking. My grandfather answered the phone and simply asked, "What did you do?" And my uncle responds, "Nothing. Great, tell him to let you go," and hangs up the phone and goes back to sleep. Both my uncle and the police were stunned, but it being the weekend, my uncle ended up having to get transferred to the county jail until Monday morning. The police from the jail called my grandfather on Monday morning and said, "You've got to pick the poor kid up. His time in jail wasn't particularly traumatic, but it taught him a pretty valuable lesson in how principled his grandfather was. Had he been honest and just admitted what he did, he wouldn't have been in that situation." That's our second story showing us that although people who are born into money are as often as not massive entitled idiots, those who actually go from rags to riches aren't necessarily so. It's too bad there's so little room to do so these days. No joke here, back in high school in the 90s, this kid got a brand new Chevy Camaro. I had an old 80s Pontiac Phoenix that had the straight six. It was by far not a racing car, but this tool was just looking to brag at what he got compared to the busted cars we got. About 2 days later, while we were waiting at the stoplight, this idiot tries to race us. I'm in my car and I pull up with my friends. He starts revving it real loud and tries to do a burnout. Mind you, the light was red and the roads were not wet. So he managed to get a tiny burnout going, some smoke and whatnot, when his tires catch traction and he goes barreling into the intersection and smashed the car of the wife of one of the very few cops in my tiny town. Needless to say, that didn't work out for him very well. A kid from my high school came from a well-known family that was very involved in politics. He slacked off in school and was mostly a condescending butthead for years. After graduation, he didn't really do anything, but eventually decided to run for office as he had the same name as his father. He won easily because people didn't realize it was the kid. As a state rep, he posted on Facebook about enjoying his women battered rather than plain, and asking to join the Black Caucus because he liked hip-hop. He also dropped a loaded piece on the floor in the middle of a session after fighting for the right to carry a weapon in the state house as a responsible owner. He kept getting elected despite these issues because his family was well connected and he had a dedicated following from some political groups. After 6 years in office, he got busted for some pretty illicit and illegal dealings over the internet. When they arrested him for it, they also discovered he'd been dealing substances. The worst part is that his family is actually super nice and genuinely made the community a better place, but now they have to deal with all the issues from him. He was an apple that fell very far from the tree. Middle school. A classmate was on the phone when most of us didn't even have cell phones, screaming at her stepdad, "Patrick, I need the $500. I need to buy new jeans." She did not get the $500, but she did later get to be a teen mom, so that was cool. When I was a teenager, my sister and I saw through our windows that there were two guys getting into her car. We ran downstairs as fast as possible and caught them in the act. One managed to run away, but the other one froze and didn't run. He couldn't have been much older than me. My sister called the cops and the guy kept looking at us and trying to figure out a way to escape. My sister said, "Run if you want, my brother will catch you." The cops came and so did his parents. His mum drove a frickin' amazing car, and the lady looked furious and sad. She was dressed real nice and she looked like she was pretty successful. As soon as she got out, she began yelling, "Why? We give you everything. You have everything. Why would you try and steal? Don't we give you enough?" The kid just seemed to shrink and get smaller. I don't get it, frickin' butthole. I hope he turned his life around and began to be around better people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Freshman year of college, the guy across the hall from me was a spoiled rich kid from a big southern city. Old money clearly coming out of his butt. A couple of weeks into the second semester, he and a buddy found a checkbook on the sidewalk. Stupid idiots decided to write themselves a check and cash it in the bank that the account was in. The teller immediately called the cops and they both got arrested. We talked the night he got arrested and he laughed and said his dad would take care of it and everything would be fine. That weekend, we met his dad as they moved everything out of the dorms since his dumb butt got expelled. I guess Daddy didn't take care of it. Nothing too serious, but I taught at an international school in Africa and we'd take the high school students camping one week out of the year. Most of these kids were not used to camping at all and have never taken public transport in their lives. They had full-time drivers bring them to school and pick them up. Some of them are from very wealthy and politically connected families. Having them set up tents and get dirty, not be able to shower every day and sleep on hard ground was pretty new to them. Some of them actually love it, but others are sad, pathetic wretches the entire week. Ah, camping, the great equalizer. I went to a very rich, predominantly white Catholic high school. One moment I do remember was the wind absolutely being taken out of a girl's sails when I explained to her why our school dominated the area's skiing, golf, and equestrian competitions, but never anything else. For a lot of kids in that school, the moment they learned they were rich was the moment they learned that most girls don't have their own horses growing up. A kid I knew won a cool $1 million off a scratch ticket when he was 19. He acted like a big shot, arrogantly buying rounds of drinks for entire bars, didn't do crap for 20 years. Then he got the last check. Alcoholic, no savings, no assets, and no skills. He's now in and out of hospitals for alcohol poisoning and mental breakdowns. He lost his paper hat job, his girlfriend, everything. There you go. Maybe it isn't explicitly being born into money that makes you a sack of crap. Maybe it's just getting more money than you know what to do with when you're young and dumb. If I had $1 million when I was 19, I actually think my life might have gone pretty similarly, and I'd be worse off now. For a couple of years in high school, I went to the super expensive American private school in Switzerland. The company my dad worked for paid for almost all of the tuition, so it was an amazing opportunity for me. Most of the kids in the school were either State Department or from American families living in Saudi. Saudi provided expat kids with school up until 10th grade, so you had to go to school abroad to finish high school. There were, however, a few Saudi kids that were there, mostly so that they'd be able to speak flawless English to help out with their future careers. One of these kids, who I'll call the Prince, was somewhere in the line of Saudi succession, but honestly he was like 1,455th in line for the throne. Not a real contender for king, but his family was rich. Like rich in a way that most of us can't even imagine. The school had some rules, like you couldn't have a car as a student, even if you were old enough to get a license in Switzerland. This rule was a real buzzkill for the prince, but he made it through the year somehow. Over the summer after his junior year, he drove back to the school from Geneva in his Lamborghini, probably just because he could do it outside the school year. On his way up the mountain, the road is like an endless series of hairpin turns, he managed to flip his Lambo into a vineyard while trying to navigate one of those hairpin turns. I'm guessing a Lambo has a lot of power and he took it too hard. His parents, furious at what he had done, decided to punish him by replacing his Lamborghini with a Porsche. The prince was so angry. He complained about it bitterly when the school year started up again. The rest of us kind of just looked at each other in amazement. Same planet, different worlds, I guess. Local rich kid had his SUV in a no parking area at the club. Tow truck shows up to tow it away and the kid goes ballistic. "Do you know who my father is?" etc. to the tow truck driver. After a minute or two of this, the passenger gets out of the tow truck and is a full patch Hell's Angel. The biker politely tells him it doesn't matter who he thinks his family is, and the SUV is towed away. I knew a kid in high school whose parents were loaded. When he got his driver's license, they bought him a $70,000 Mercedes. Within a month or two, he had totaled the car while driving drunk. Parents pulled strings to get him off the full weight of the DUI. Oh, and they bought him another $70,000 Mercedes. He took too many substances and too much booze when he was 23. He's no longer alive now. I knew one who apparently couldn't fathom how people live on a budget. We used to hang out a lot at her insistence, but she liked to eat at expensive places, whereas I'd have no issue with my meals coming from somewhere cheaper. However, she kept pouting and insisting that I stay. I said I couldn't unless she wanted to spot me. She didn't. I then walked her through the math and showed her the cost of my meals with her. Every day totaled my entire wage for the month. She didn't stop pouting, but from then on, I could eat by myself in peace. You know, I'm trying to be a better man and not take delight in anyone's misfortune, but a rich kid in my high school totaled his pickup truck. He got angry when parents wouldn't replace it, so he purposefully crashed his twin brother's pickup truck, because if he couldn't have one, neither could the brother. Not to mention all the legal stuff that I'm sure was fallout from doing that. Anyway, that kid disappeared. I assumed he went to jail or something like that. Found out recently that no, he didn't actually. His parents literally disowned him, like with the paperwork and everything, and sent him on his way to fend for himself. And I have no idea how that turned out. A guy from my robotics group had his entire life handed to him. His dad was stupid rich because his dad bought shares in an oil field that turned out to have 40 times the expected yield, making his $100,000 investment become around $3 million, and then he dumped that into real estate rentals. He decided it would be fun to do a school trip in Philly acting rich as all heck. He drove his lifted, modded SUV to a school we were doing a robotics event at in North Philly, talking to younger kids about how it's fun and their school has started offering it, and then we were going to the Franklin Institute from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., then a Phantoms hockey game. Well, 9:30 rolls around and we leave the school to see our bus driver talking to the cops. 5 kids drove themselves down, and guess which car was stolen? His $90,000 monstrosity was missing, and after 2 months, and all that was ever recovered was his stereo from a pawn shop and his laptop. The best frickin' part? He didn't have insurance on it yet because he can just buy the other person's car if there's an accident. Anyway, I'd win the legal fight. His dad flipped out over it and cut his allowance down to $200 a month and forced him to drive a beater until he saved up his own money. That brat's punishment is more than I could have ever wanted as an upper-middle-class kid. Growing up around a well-to-do old area, the thing is you wouldn't know it. Like most of our neighbors were comfortably off because we didn't drive fancy $40,000 cars or whatever. Yeah, the narrator had an allowance as a young adult, and not a bad one either. It was still, and I can't stress this enough, a very small fraction of what this guy was getting when his parents were done with his crap. A rich, scummy injury lawyer's kid was in my class in high school. Goes to college, a mid-sized school in the Midwest, and gets plastered drunk. Parents bought him and his friends alcohol since freshman year, so nothing new there, and the RA said he has to write him up for alcohol in the dorms. The guy then punches 2 RAs and then gets the cops called on him and knocks a cop's tooth out as well. Long story short, his parents have to drive back 6 to 7 hours after one day to get him, and he's not even allowed to leave the state until his hearing. The last I heard, he's working at a fast food restaurant. In a country with a high alcohol taxation, rich kids enter the pub, like 10 to 12 of them. They throw the card at the bartender demanding shots. What would he like? Whatever, Dad's paying. The bartender pours double Johnny Walker Blues for all the brats and some randoms that they've treated. The brat with the card had tears in his eyes when the tab came in. My dad's gonna kill me. I did enjoy that free whiskey though. Here's a switch. Highly successful local doctor and politician expects his son to attend medical school and become a doctor. The son opts out, gets a job with a new company called Costco pumping gas. He's been with that company ever since, just his regular pay raises and bonus checks give him a good life. He just didn't want the high-stress life that his dad had. If I was sure I'd inherit most of my dad's wealth, I'd do that too. Work at Costco just to socialize and pass the time, and the earnings for personal spending and whatnot. Just spend wisely and not be a jerk, and then I would have lived comfortably after that. This isn't the best, as it's pretty sad and frankly undeserved, but a good example of the question asked. I went to a very expensive private elementary school. A friend of mine grew up wealthy. Her father was a surgeon and mother a stay-at-home wife. They were very controlling of her and, quite honestly, a bit scary. They sheltered her to the extreme and she frequently repeated insane things that they'd said verbatim because that was all she knew. If she was told to clean her room but left an item out upon her parents' inspection, they'd throw the item out no matter what it was. Once it was something very sentimental to her. I can't remember exactly what, and when she told me and I expressed sympathy, she said something like, "Oh no, it's okay, it's my fault. If I told my children to clean their rooms but they didn't and had their friends come over, their friends would go home and tell their parents about how much of a slob my family is, and that can't happen." This was her concern as a 10-year-old. When it came time for college, they sent her to an expensive, hard-to-get-into school and told her that her sole purpose there was to find a husband, specifically a doctor or an engineer, to keep her as a stay-at-home wife. She flat out told me this was her only purpose, which broke my heart because she's a smart person who was able to get into said school to begin with, and her parents should have been encouraging different goals for her. Well, she found a boyfriend, but at the end of her 4 years of undergrad, he turned out to be a cheating, narcissistic D-bag. The narcissistic D-bag part was obvious to me from the get-go, but she had no idea what a healthy relationship looked like. However, the cheating was obvious enough to be a deal-breaker. So instead of going straight to marriage, which disappointed her parents and they kicked her out of the house, she suddenly had to become solely independent, found a job and an apartment, and is doing well for herself. She's a totally different person now and has really come a long way.
Round 2. Make-A-Wish employees. What was the most strange thing a Make-A-Wish kid asked for and actually received? I shot an internal promotional video for Make-A-Wish once. I got to read through a big book of wishes they had granted. Some of them were so extravagant and amazing. Family vacations, celebrity meetings. And then I saw a 3-year-old who wished for a banana split for breakfast. And that's what they gave him. No one was like, "Ayo, wish higher." I helped host a visit to a planetarium by a kid whose wish was to go to the moon. The front office folks thought I could just give her a personal tour of the planetarium and show her some nice high-resolution visuals, but I thought she deserved better than that. I commissioned a jeweler friend and meteorite enthusiast to make a silver crescent moon necklace, which he graciously donated to the cause, and I donated a small lunar meteorite from my own collection. It was a gorgeous necklace, very much to the credit of my friend's artistry and generosity. We couldn't take her to the moon, so we gave it to her instead. She was thrilled, but later said her real highlight of the trip was the astronaut ice cream. Ah, kids. My daughter was a Make-A-Wish kid. She asked to go to Australia to meet the Wiggles. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to travel that far. We live in the US, health-wise. She made a second wish to meet Captain America. We never told Cap that he was a backup wish after the Wiggles were a no-go. When my sister was 5 and I was 8, she had cancer and the opportunity to make a wish. When our mom and the Make-A-Wish person sat down with her, they told her she could wish for whatever she wanted. She just kept saying she wanted macaroni. They kept saying, "But it could be anything you want." Yet she simply wanted macaroni and cheese. After some strong encouragement to think bigger and the Make-A-Wish person suggesting Disneyland, she chose to go to Disneyland. My good friend had ALL leukemia. He asked for a ride in a fighter jet, and somehow he got it. I was surprised, because the doctors would say how his bones were getting fragile and weaker, and I guess I thought the G-forces of the jet would hurt him, but he was fine and had a blast. He's doing better now and is scheduled out in about 3 months. I was granted a wish after beating brain cancer in 2015. They flew my mom and I out to the capital city of our state, and we stayed in the flashiest, most expensive hotel suite with all the bells and whistles. We got free dinner, drinks, and dessert on arrival, got to chill in the VIP lounge while we were waiting for our room. Our room was decorated with teddy bears and chocolates and Make-A-Wish decorations. The next day, we were chauffeured to the local mall in a limo, and I went on an 11-hour shopping spree with a preloaded Visa card and bought every solitary thing you could imagine a 16-year-old girl wanting. I ended up having to buy another suitcase to take everything home with me, but it was the most epic 3 days of my life. I'll never forget it. Number 1. To be a merman, a boy mermaid. He got a tail and swam in the giant tank with other mermaids at the aquarium. Number 2. To play football with the quote, red team. No pro or college preference, just had to be red. USC made it happen. Number 3. To be a quote, cool kid. Got a limo ride to the mall. Red carpet entrance with cheering fans, signed autographs, shopping spree for clothes. 5 years old. So cute and very cool. Number 4. To be Robin. Not Batman. He said he wasn't ready for that. Went on an epic adventure fighting crime with Batman. I was a chef at a fancy steakhouse in Jacksonville, Florida. One day, my proprietor came to me and said, "This is Stacy, the new girl. She'll be training with you." I look over, and it's this adorable little girl in a bright pink chef's coat. I babysat my little cousins at the time, so I was actually pretty used to entertaining 10-year-old girls at the time. So I showed her the ropes. We made all kinds of stuff that were on the surface kinda random. Candied bacon, cornbread, prosciutto-wrapped Boursin cheese stuffed asparagus, a sweet tea brined pork chop, a sorrel garnish salad type thing, and some other cool garnishes. We were having fun. I then made a puree out of the cornbread, let her plate up the dish a few different ways to show how you can play with the ingredients and height to showcase different parts of the dish. She had a blast. It was only at the end when the father came up to me in tears that I realized what was going on. In the moment, I was a little upset because nobody told me, but I realized it was for the best. I probably would not have been as bright and vibrant with the lessons had I have known, but it was a fulfilling experience for sure. I sure hope that family is doing well. Side note, I have reworked and reran the dish as a special a few times in memory of that day. It was that impactful. If there's one thing in the world I would wish for, it's for you to subscribe to the Am I the Jerk channel and Am I the Genius linked in the description below. Thanks for watching, and drop a like if you're enjoying the video. It really helps. I worked at a hospice, and we had a wishing program. One of our patients, 24-year-old with brain cancer, wanted to hold a sloth. Apparently, sloths are very nervous creatures, so it's a little tricky to actually hold one. I found a local company that does visits to schools and whatnot who had a sloth. Sloths only poop about once a week, bear with me here, and the sloth could only travel the day after he pooped, because they get nervous any longer than that and the sloth has stress diarrhea. So basically, we had to wait until the sloth pooped and then set up the visit for the next day. The sloth pooped on Thanksgiving, so we set up the visit for the next morning. The patient was able to hold and pet a very sweet sloth. The patient died about 3 weeks later, and I am very happy I was able to help give her some joy in her final moments. Wow guys, I did not expect this to blow up. Thank you so much for the awards. The hospice I worked at had a special program called Faithful Wishes for any of our patients, regardless of age. As the volunteer coordinator, fulfilling these wishes was part of my job. I do believe there are other nonprofit organizations that grant wishes to adults, but nothing as large as Make-A-Wish. Yes, the sloth was tame and lived in an animal preserve. He would also visit schools and retirement communities, schedule permitting. And yes, I absolutely learned more about sloth bowel movements than I ever wanted to. I worked at a Lego retail store in the 2000s, and Make-A-Wish approached us for a child with terminal osteosarcoma who wanted to be in the store for a day. Lego unfortunately denied the request, which surprised myself and the rest of the staff because Lego was a pretty great company. Staff decided to honor the request ourselves. We closed the store early on a Sunday, then invited the kid and family in. He had a full run of the store. We collectively paid for like $1,000 worth of toys for him to take home and just spent the entire evening building whatever he wanted. He died a few months later. Not Make-A-Wish, but my brother got terminal brain cancer when he was 18. He was given 3 to 6 months to live. Back then, his only wish was to be an NFL player, but he was 5'8", all heart. He was just like Rudy in that Notre Dame football movie. He fought it for 6 years. Somewhere around his 22nd birthday, he and I were talking about having something worth living for. I told him it didn't matter what it was, but a vision for the future that he would fight for was important and encouraged him to find something to give his life to. We went on a vacation soon after that, and because we were broke from medical bills and 4 years of battling cancer as a family, this was a huge deal. We hadn't had a family vacation for a long time. A family friend put us up in their beach house and gave us some money to have a good time there. My brother came alive on the trip. It was so impactful to him that he came home and decided to start a nonprofit organization. He called it A Week Away. It was very similar to Make-A-Wish. Terminally sick patients apply and benefit from an all-expenses-paid vacation with their family or group of caregivers. That was a big deal to him to include the family, because if you've ever gone something like that, you know it's not just the patient who suffers and loses their freedom, it's everyone they are close to. He worked his butt off to start the organization. He formed it and began sending families to places like the Outer Banks and Ocean City and other East Coast beaches. A week before he died, he launched his first big, month-long fundraiser. He passed away knowing that he had raised enough to send like 10 families on respite weeks. It was like he was passing the baton off to others who could keep on fighting. The org is still going strong today. If anyone is blessed to have their health and a sweet vacation spot you'd like to donate for occasional use by sick people, all coordinated by an awesome organization, I'd encourage you to reach out to the A Week Away folks. You get to play a part in people's lives like the awesome people helping in these Make-A-Wish stories. There was a Make-A-Wish kid in a class I taught once, and their wish was to tour a pickle factory. Pickles were their all-time favorite food, and they wanted to see how the sausage was made, so to speak. Apparently, Vlasic rose to the occasion in a major way, and she had the time of her life. A friend of mine is a K-9 police officer. He helped Make-A-Wish grant a wish to a set of twins with the deadliest form of cystic fibrosis. Most of the time, kids with CF aren't allowed to be around others with it because of cross-infecting bacteria. Them being twins shortens their life expectancy even more. Well, these 10-year-old boys wanted to meet a police dog. My friend and some of his buddies upped the wish, and during their meeting of his dog, they got called to help solve 3, quote, crimes in their town. They pulled over a hijacker, found and arrested a robber, and helped find a, quote, missing 6-year-old, my friend's nephew. The town police department gave them certificates and honorary police badges for their work. Around 200 people showed up to where they got their awards to cheer them on. At their 11th birthday, they gave my friend a plaque they made with their dad, thanking him for the best day ever. I was approached by a similar organization who wanted to arrange a day for a kid to shadow a veterinarian. I'm just a small animal veterinarian with a small hospital, so I found it odd that I'd be approached. I said yes, who the heck would say no? And we picked a day and had our regular patients in the hospital, and the kid got to watch us do our thing for a day. We gave him a lab coat and a stethoscope, and let him tag along and see x-rays and ultrasounds and watch surgeries. I brought my dog in so he could try the ultrasound on her. He seemed to enjoy it. It wasn't a terribly strange request, really. It just seems like my day-to-day isn't something anyone would consider their dream experience. In Wizard 101, there's a quest with an NPC named Brandon, named after a Make-A-Wish kid who played the game. And his request was to design a side quest for the game. You meet Brandon and go help him clear out this dungeon with 2 really hard bosses. Was a lot of fun. At the end, you get a gem you can socket that lets you summon Brandon into battle as a follower. Pretty cool. Not sure what ended up happening to Brandon, but it's really cool that thousands of people have gotten to enjoy being a part of his wish, to be honest. My cousin was a Make-A-Wish kid. He loved golf, had a scholarship to go play college, he loved it so much. He got to meet and play a round of golf with Payne Stewart. Unfortunately, he died not too long after that. Screw cancer. I know someone who was granted a wish. Of all things they could choose, they asked for 2 tiny birds, 2 budgies. After I survived cancer at 17, I was offered a wish. I went to Christmas Island with my family to see the spawning of the red crabs, reckoned to be one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Picture it, 1 million fist-sized red land crabs making their way down to the sea edge to release their eggs into the ocean over a period of just 3 hours or so. The Make-A-Wish volunteers looked horrified as I explained it. And I'm typing this now, so yes, I lived. Thanks. Edit. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure my wish caught my family a bit off guard too. I had a coworker at my student job in college who had leukemia as a child. He wished to be in the IDOWROD, so they flew his family to Alaska and he got to meet all the dogs and ride in a sled for a leg of the race. If I remember correctly, he also got a husky puppy. He was 20 when I met him. I was a couple of years older and graduated college and never saw him again. The leukemia came back and he died in 2016. I don't think he was much older than 25. One of the nicest guys I've ever met. I hope heaven is real, just for you, Ben. When I was on a carrier, they flew a kid and his parents out. They routinely fly distinguished visitors, but we thought it was weird there was this kid. They got tours and watched flight ops, but he couldn't fly with us, so they asked us to have dinner with him so he could at least meet pilots and ask questions. It was really humbling when we realized this is what he was there for. He literally wished to just come see what we do and hang out with us. I'm a Make-A-Wish volunteer. The volunteers get to do all the fun stuff, like meet with the families, get the kids excited about their wish. We send little gifts and stuff along the way, and then be there when the wish is granted. We don't have to do any of the boring admin stuff. I have a little girl right now whose original wish was a unicorn, 6-year-old with severe epilepsy, has 15 seizures a day, and has been through 10 surgeries already. She wasn't having any of that fake stuff, like a stuffed animal or a costume. She insisted for weeks on a unicorn. That one was hard to manage. She's getting a cat. I was a Make-A-Wish kid back in 2017, and my wish was to go see a live brain surgery in Seattle at University of Washington. I loved Grey's Anatomy, I loved Dr. Shepard, and I had brain cancer, so I wanted to see what my doctors kinda saw. What an experience, and I learned so much. I was a little neurosurgeon for a day, and the neurosurgeon was playing the Pixies while operating. What a great happy moment. I won't forget. They even sent my family from Arizona to Seattle with me to have dinner with me in the Space Needle. I was a Black Hawk pilot in the Army, and we had a Make-A-Wish kid who wanted to fly in an Army helicopter. We had to remove all the seats so we could strap his wheelchair down in the middle of the helicopter, and we flew him around at treetop level, yanking and banking with the doors open for a while. I'm a wish granter. My strangest personal wish was a refurbished 80s camper so that she could have her own space. She couldn't go out in public while her transplant was new-ish, and she was going crazy in the house with 2 younger siblings. It was actually pretty cool, although the strange part was that Make-A-Wish can't actually use, quote, used things like that. So we had to get her a new VW camper, or something like that, it's been a while, and, quote, artfully make it look vintage. So strange. Anyways, please feel free to apply to be a Make-A-Wish volunteer. It's such a rewarding experience, and even if you don't feel like you can work with the kids, there's also other volunteer positions like fundraising, event planning, and more. Former employee here. Over half of the wishes are Disney-related, and beyond that, they typically fall into a few categories. I wish to travel, I wish to meet, I wish to be, I wish to have, I wish to give. You get the idea. So, I always liked wishes that fell outside of the typical wish categories. One time, there was a boy that wished for the perfect baked potato. I don't know if the wish granters went through with that wish. They may have waited until he was a little older, but I still laugh when I think about it. Volunteers are trained to ensure they are determining the child's one true wish, not mom's wish to go on a cruise or dad's wish for new tools, etc. A lot of work and thought goes into fulfilling a child's wish. My brother had cancer when we were in high school. We all got to go to an ice skating rink in New York City and play hockey with some of the New York Rangers. He was a Flyers fan, but what can you do? This wasn't actually his wish, but it was set up at the Make-A-Wish Foundation for all the terminal kids at the hospital, I'm pretty sure. I used to know a dude who got sick in high school, and his wish was to see Rocksteady Studios and be in one of their games. The studio was super cool, evidently, and they put him in Arkham Knight as a GCPD officer. Best part of the story is that he recovered and, last I heard, is still doing okay to this day. Glad to see that I'm not the only one with this, quote, weird request. I was also eligible for Make-A-Wish when I started high school, and I asked to visit DICE at their HQ in Stockholm. I didn't ask to be in any of their games though. Dang it, why didn't I think of that? I was passionate about game development, and I still am, and thus wanted to see what it's like to work in a AAA studio, and also ask a bunch of game dev stuff. They constantly asked me, are you sure you wouldn't rather want to go to Disneyland? I said, this is my Disneyland. Guess they thought it was a weird request for a 15-year-old to make. This year, I finished my bachelor's degree in computer science, and in the future, I can hopefully land a job in game dev. Edit, I see many people here congratulating me for surviving. I forgot to disclose that the condition I have is not nearly as deadly as, for example, cancer. I have had a heart condition that has been treated through surgery since birth. This condition will never go away and can cause death even after treatment, but my doctor monitors my condition every year so far, and it's looking excellent. Just wanted to address this. Okay, this is more wholesome than anything, but a girl who was a grade above me had cancer in high school. She graduated, and I joined the band my senior year to see this plaque with her name and face on it from Make-A-Wish. She used her wish to donate new instruments to the school's band, as they were needing new ones. I still know her to this day, and she makes a ton of jokes about cancer that it even freaked out her college roommates. She's one of the nicest people I've ever met. I had a wish when I was 8 due to having leukemia and a bone marrow transplant. My first thought was, meet Bruce Willis. Die Hard was my newly discovered favorite film. But my dad asked if I wanted something that would last like a computer. I always loved playing on the hospital computers, so yeah, I went for that. Best decision ever. I might owe my career to it. I hear Bruce Willis is a bit of a jerk IRL anyway. A funeral. He knew his parents wouldn't be able to afford one, so he wished to have his funeral paid for. They were able to convince him to make another wish, and he wished for gold lockets for his mom and sister with his initials engraved on them. Edit, his funeral was paid for as well. I believe another nonprofit helped with that. They just really wanted him to have a wish for himself, but all he cared about was his family. I'm not a Make-A-Wish employee, but a kid at my church a long time ago wished to sit in a bathtub full of peach-colored loofahs. The softball kind, obviously, not the hard, sponge-like ones. He got it, and the church bulletin had a picture of this kid smiling like a maniac in a huge bathtub full of loofahs, so I guess he was happy with his wish. When my son was 3, his Make-A-Wish was to meet Elmo. For a 3-year-old, not that strange, I guess. Sent us to Sesame World in Philly. We get there, and they had no clue he was on a Make-A-Wish trip, but they were great, and he met Elmo. Reddit, what is the best comeback that works against all insults? I bet that sounded a lot cooler in your head. Once I saw an Am I the Jerk post where a bride was jealous of a guest because she was too beautiful and, quote, stole her day, even if she was perfectly elegant, and she was insulting her. The bride told her, "So next time, can I come to your wedding in a wedding gown?" The guest replied, "If you think it'll help." And I found that epic. Anytime my mom would get called names or insulted, she'd shrug and just say, "Everybody's gotta be something." I like this one, actually. I feel like it's the least argumentative comeback here. Deflecting people or responding with a witty thing can just rile them up. Source, Psycho Family, as they take it the same way as being ignored. This one gives a sort of illusion that you accept what they've said and they've already moved on from it. Like, I've heard what you said, I've taken it in, and I let it go before the bully even has a chance to process it themselves. I feel like there's still room for reconciliation after this response. It's important to remember the other person in these situations, not because we should be empathetic towards their abusive choices, but because we should be empathetic towards their lead-up emotions. My 5-year-old says mean things sometimes because he hasn't practiced patience and understanding enough. He's learned how to properly react, but he's not mature enough to utilize it properly every time he gets worked up. And this is not unexpected of a 5-year-old. A lot of people much older than 5 are also similarly emotionally immature. My husband didn't have much practice with patience before he met me. 10 years later, and he's all mellowed out. I'm not perfect, of course, but I am confident in my ability to stay cool in the face of craziness, which helps me remember to think of the other person. When my husband used to get irrationally upset about tiny things and then redirect that upsetness at me, I always considered that he may literally never have had the chance to learn these things before meeting me. He was, emotionally, a 5-year-old. I can't expect greatness until he's had the opportunity to learn how to be great in the first place. Although, I don't put myself through abuse for the sake of another person's learning experience. If I ever feel unsafe or uncomfortable in an abusive situation, I just leave. That's with my 5-year-old and my husband. I always tell my son, "You've got a little body, but huge emotions, so sometimes they spill out a little bit. I don't want you to hurt me and regret it later. As soon as you're done letting those emotions out, I'll come in and hug you. Just yell for me." Then he screams into his pillow or destroys some Lego structures and calls me in to comfort him when he doesn't feel like those emotions are spilling out as much. At the end of his anger outbursts, he always cries in regret for having been angry in the first place. That vulnerability point is where we practice coping mechanisms for his anger. I saw similar emotions in my husband 10 years ago, albeit less obvious. Angry adults are, internally, little 5-year-olds whose emotions are spilling over, and they're scared. Not an excuse, but a shining light onto the anger process in their brains. Not sure where this rant came from today, but here it is. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That sounds like something you would say. Dang, people are right about you. Well, I guess what everyone says about you is true. My dad told me to say this, and the typical bully type will generally go crazy thinking everyone talks about them behind their back. Just say okay and move on. People who insult want a reaction. Don't give it to them. I found out just asking why and putting them in a position to explain their insult which didn't have much thought behind it works well. Pull my earbuds out with a confused expression and ask, "What?" Hold a stare and blank face for at least 3 seconds and then ask in a concerning tone, "Are you okay?" Up your butt and around the corner. Worked when I was 10. Big fan of the pause for a beat, deadpan, and then some variation/combo of, you done? Feel better now? Got that out of your system? Just that pause and little bit of patronizing tone while dismissing the childlike behavior usually does more to the ego than a counter-insult. I'm a woman, and my job basically boils down to arguing with attorneys who are mostly men with huge egos and a large helping of disdain for people they deem, quote, beneath them. It's common for them to get pushy, loud, and insulting when they're not getting their way. That was intimidating at first, but now I look forward to it because it gives me an opportunity to use my favorite line. It sounds like you're getting a little emotional about this. Do you want to call me back when you've calmed down so we can get this done? This is always met with a delicious pause, followed by them either hanging up or launching into the most high-pitched screeching you've ever heard. Being called emotional by a woman who is perfectly calm breaks something in them, and it's my favorite thing. Never in my life would I have described an attorney as a, quote, whiny baby type until I worked for a couple. Jesus Christ, you weren't kidding. Attorneys who are mostly men with huge egos and a large helping of disdain for people they deem beneath them? 100% all of this. It was insane. Any woman non-attorney working for them was tasked to be their mom or maid. It was infuriating to see such a caste system in place in current times. They literally would ask you a question and then stop listening halfway through your answer. They'd hire you for one job only to end up getting another job babysitting the admin. Or the poor intern who just wanted to learn tax law was roped into cooking for the entire office. She was not trained to be a caterer, but was expected to be one. She finally just quit because she was tired of being told food service was now her job. It was an insane place to work at, and I think I made it 6 months before I realized working for these people were insane. At one point, I was working on my laptop, authorized, because we were waiting on my new equipment to show up and I had to bring in my personal computer in the meantime. The head partner knew this. His office manager knew this. I had been working about a month on my laptop and no one had an issue with it. One morning, this jerk starts screaming at me how using a personal computer was a security risk and how does he even know that I'm working on work and not personal stuff, etc. The guy was, quote, brilliant at being a lawyer, but couldn't remember a conversation from last week. He changed his mind constantly. We'd start a project only to have him abandon or change it completely the next week. It was insanity. It opened my eyes to what kind of people lawyers actually are. I think the worst part is, commenting on this before, how many people pop up and say how a lot of them are insufferable to work for like the ones I did. Alright, here's the 411. Say some gangsta is dissing your fly girl. You just give him one of these. You're not subscribed to Am I the Genius or Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below. And like the video while you're at it. TLDR, being in the trades gets you some good practice and comebacks. I'm an electrical apprentice, and when I first started, there was a bit of hazing and teasing from the journeymen. It never got too bad, mostly a lot of talk. One in particular was kinda on me one day, and since he was fairly young, just recently licensed, I just responded like, did someone treat you like this when you were an apprentice? Do you have some unresolved issues? Do you need a hug? Oddly, he never really responded, but I didn't have any trouble with him anymore. On the same job, the excavator accidentally broke our grounding grid, a big underground copper cable grid used to ground all the structures in the substation. So, I had to jump down, in the rain, into the hole to patch it up. It was wet and muddy, but I was wearing a full rain suit. Another older journeyman, who was my foreman and had worked for my father more than once, made a sarcastic remark along the lines of, "We should take a picture, wouldn't your daddy be proud?" I just looked up at him and said, "Well, I'm doing my job, I'm doing it well, and I'm not moaning and complaining about it. Yeah, he likely would be proud." I also had another apprentice yell at me, "Stop talking to me like I'm a freaking moron," to which I responded, "Stop talking to me like you're a freaking moron." I did kinda provoke him, but he was being really dense. And basically takes all the wind out of their sails. They want to get a rise out of you, and responding like this doesn't give them the satisfaction. I once had someone say to me, "Jesus, they let you out for the day and this happens?" I had to laugh and give them that one. Stick your finger in your mouth/cheek and pull it forward and out so that it makes a popping noise. There are many people who wouldn't be speechless after witnessing that during a conversation/argument. Well, that's just like your opinion, man. Just laugh out loud. If someone's trying to make you mad, acting like nothing they've said matters to you in the least and their attempts at making you feel bad are laughable will really take the wind out of their sails. I've done it. It's immensely satisfying. I once got punched in the face by a guy who had started trying to bully me in 7th grade. I don't know why, but I just started laughing. That uncontrollable, this isn't funny and it's not appropriate to laugh right now, but there's no way to stop it type laugh. It wasn't intentional, and I wasn't trying to freak the guy out, but he turned beet red, mumbled that I was a freaking psycho, and stalked away. He wouldn't even make eye contact with me through the end of high school, so that worked out well. I envy the people that don't know you. So's your face. Bold words for a man in white sauce distance. You freaking Americans will use anything except the metric system. There's a female gamer during a live stream, taking crap for some jerk she just beat. Without a pause, she drops, "I'm going to screw your dad tonight and give birth to someone he actually loves." It's easy, guys. Just repeat what they've said back, but in a high-pitched, sarcastic tone. I find it works especially well in customer service when dealing with tricky complaints. I think I know the answer, Mr. Garrison. Shut up, fat boy! Hey, don't call me fat, you Jew! My dad told me to respond to bullying by saying, "Sorry about your family situation," and walk away, looking very sympathetic and sad. Like, you understand, and it's okay. I've caused a few breakdowns for sure. Yeah, well, the jerk store called, and they're running out of you! Just walk away while they're talking. It's probably the rudest thing you can do. Plus, you save your time, and if they call you a coward, smile in evil joy as you know they'll be thinking about this for the rest of the week. I don't get why that's funny. Can you explain it to me? As soon as they start talking, I was just kidding. I don't actually care what you think. Hit him with the old, "It doesn't matter what you think," like The Rock used to do. You want my comeback? You'd have to wipe it off your mom's teeth, Jimmy Carr. First of all, brush your teeth. Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries. The anti-comeback is my favorite. A light breeze has more effect on me than someone insulting or bullying me these days. I couldn't tell you what the last 5 or 10 people in my life that tried to publicly humiliate me even looked like. I never looked at them. What they were saying never made me miss a beat in whatever I was doing. They get so mad every time, try to bait me a few times, and then eventually give up. Meanwhile, everyone around me can hear and see what's happening. There's only one person that everyone is witnessing making a fool out of themselves, and it's not me. The no reaction, is the best reaction. I don't even entertain crap talkers, and if anything, let them have their quote, moment, as it gives a decent perspective as to where their heads are at. I moved into a new neighborhood a few years back, and I have no idea what I did to get on one of my neighbors' bad side. I've moved every 18 months of my life since birth and lived all over the world, and it wasn't until almost 40 that I came across the most vile and disturbed neighbor I've ever had. Shortly after moving in, got invited to a little get-together, and dude was projecting for almost an hour, straight giggling and laughing his butt off the whole time, trying to get a rise out of me. He had spent some time looking me up online and was boasting about things he had found. I'm a former celebrity overseas, and my life is an open book, and I've had a few stalkers in the past. This guy took the prize for the most obsessed and weird. Weirdest interaction I've ever had when first meeting someone, let alone a new neighbor. Thanks to them, I cleaned up my online presence as I am no longer famous, was a long time ago, and don't bother with people younger than me anymore. We would have neighborhood watch meetings, and the guy or his boyfriend would make some snide remarks about my son's attire. I never gave them the time of day, and everyone could see them festering from their weird obsession with being so negative. I'm a pretty self-aware dude, and know if I'm committing a social faux pas. This dude apparently isn't. Let them keep talking without engaging, and it will speak volumes about them versus whatever it is they're accusing or bullying you for. Freaking weirdos. I'd give you a nasty look, but you've already got one. Oh, sweetie. Did that make you feel good? Oh. Just a dead-eye stare that lasts too long. No words. No one likes to screw with crazy. Sudden and overwhelming physical violence! Am I the Genius or Am I the Jerk and their affiliated parties do not support, endorse, or condone physical violence. The opinions of Reddit users are their own and do not reflect upon the Am I the Genius or Am I the Jerk YouTube channels. Okay, thanks, bye. Well, I never. Good day to you, sir. I said good day. My husband has a bunch of uncles. One uncle is a real piece of crap known for screwing everyone over, but the family still protected him and acted like he was okay. Without going into details, the uncle pulled some dirty, illegal crap when my husband's dad died. Everyone in the family warned us beforehand that he might try to do something. So when he did it, I laid into him, telling him we had been warned he would do it. I told him he was no gentleman, he was a liar and a thief who should be ashamed of himself. He left and went outside and started crying. The thing that hurt him was hearing that his family had warned us. I guess he had no idea how they truly felt about him, and being told he wasn't a gentleman was a deep cut. Where I trained, there was an old joke we used to say. Long-winded, but here you go. A young man goes to the circus on a first date and is sat on the ringside watching the acts when the clowns came in. One clown looked at the young man and steams over to him, getting right in the face. "Screw off! Go on, get out!" Embarrassed, the man leaves his date and leaves the circus. Full of shame and anger, he decides he's never going to be spoken to and belittled like that again. He studies hard, becomes a litigation lawyer, and becomes world famous in his field. He becomes known as the man who wins every case and can make grown men cry with just a withering look, but he can never forget the shame at his treatment from the clown. Many, many years after his initial visit at the circus, he returns, all prepared to get his own back, and finally, his moment arrives. The clowns walk into the ring. The clown immediately spots him and steams right over, getting in his face again. "I told you before, screw off! Go on, get out!" The man stands up, the shame from all those years ago rising in him. He draws a deep breath, looks the clown straight in the eye, and stutters, "Frick off, big nose!" I told you it was long-winded, and also not terribly funny. However, it became the stock response in the workshop whenever someone needed putting in their place with an insult, and never failed to make the workshop laugh. Sidebar, I've been having some trouble trying to find some of the longer ones or the ones that are original, because there are 5 comments in a row that just say, "No you, no you, no you, no you, no you." Like, it's funny the first time, and only the first time. I play hockey, and locker rooms can get fun with all sorts of crap talk flying around. My favorite was actually directed at me. I had a headache and nausea, turns out from a concussion in our previous game, and my teammate looked at me and says, "I got a straw in my car." Confused, I say, "A straw?" And mate replies with, "Yeah, so you can suck the heck up and play." Hilariously brutal roast, and all in good fun. My wife normally says to her sister, "Should I build a bridge?" When her sister says, "Why?" she says, "So you can get over it."
Your mother should have eaten you while your bones were still soft.
Hello, 911? Yes, this one, right here. Being a knob won't make yours bigger. There is no single, quote, best comeback that works against all insults, as different insults require different responses depending on the context and the individual involved. However, a general strategy for responding to insults is to avoid reacting emotionally and instead respond calmly and confidently. This can involve using humor to deflect the insult, questioning the validity of the insult, or simply ignoring the insult altogether. Ultimately, the most effective response will depend on the specific situation and the individual involved, and it's important to remember that not all insults require a response. Thanks, ChatGPT. Look them up and down, the whole body, and simply say with disinterest, "You're boring." That will live in their brain rent-free for the next 40 years, guaranteed. For me, racial slurs have never been a trigger. At this point, I've been called all of them due to no one knowing what race I am, and my patience while being insulted either confuses or makes them more angry while I'm just taking verbal abuse. I'm a light brown Thai Asian, but I have the mannerisms and accent, according to my friends of every race, of a white American dude, and my looks do not scream Asian. I think this is evident because my eyes do not have an evident Asian look. As such, I've been confused for Japanese, Chinese, Australian, Burmese, Cuban, Mexican, Brazilian, Iraqi, Afghan, Black, African, Egyptian, French, Scottish, Eskimo. Inuit is correct. Eskimo is a slur. And the most stupid one, Muslim. Yes, a person said I looked like a Muslim, as if it was a race. Of course, the moment I start talking, having a Michigan accent throws off most people angry at me, as they either try to comprehend what race I am and what insult to use against me, or most of the time, I bring them back to reality and they're trying to figure out whether it's worth wasting more energy. More, they caught themselves before saying something worse. When someone acted crazy in class, my math teacher would always say something like, "A good doctor will help you to get rid of that." Got bullied in high school by a guy in a couple classes. One day, I finally had enough. Bully. Man, you're totally gay. Me. You must be also, since from what I can tell, you're trying to flirt with me every day. Bully's friends start busting up laughing. Me. I guess this is the point where you ask me out. Awkward silence from bully. Him and his group leaves, never to torment me again. I bet you eat corn the long way. Reddit, what's your deep web story? Disclaimer, I'll keep a lot of these stories lighthearted, but do keep in mind that the further you go into the dark web, the more stuff you'll find that will absolutely land you in prison. If you don't know what you're doing, stay off of the dark web. With that being said, please enjoy the video. The majority of these stories will all be the same, because they all come from people who downloaded Tor and went exploring or browsing. The vast majority have found the hidden wiki and clicked on some links. There is a fundamental misunderstanding here of what the dark web is designed to do. Those links from the hidden wiki and other point-and-click entry sites are designed to be found. The most obvious are the darknet markets. They want customers. They put their URLs out there. They list themselves on the wiki and other Tor directories. They don't want the sites to be hidden, just the owners/servers. If you were to go to one of the directories that crawls and links all the live URLs it can find, most of them will be listed as unknown. Some will take you to a site you can look at anyway, but a lot of them will take you to a page where it simply asks for your credentials before you can go any further. There's nothing else. No link to register, no FAQ, no indication of what is behind that password login. The whole idea of Tor's hidden services is that they are hidden from anybody who doesn't have the credentials to get into them. You have to get them in some other way. There's no referral links being spammed on Reddit or the Intel Exchange or general access forums. Some of these sites may be safe havens for dissidents to discuss stuff. Some of them might be the dark, spooky places of the no-sleep stories. But chances are, none of us will ever know what is behind 99% of them. TLDR, the stuff you will find by browsing the dark web is the stuff other people have found. While I personally never received anything from any deep web-affiliated salesfolk, I did live with a roommate who would constantly receive the strangest brochures. At first, we'd receive brochures for cruise lines and the like. I wrote it off as junk mail, but they came so frequently and they started getting stranger. Christian mingle brochures, petting zoo brochures, brochures for any and all services one can think of. I kind of felt like someone was gaslighting me, but I never said anything, and the brochures would disappear as quickly as they came, so I didn't have time to stress it. Until one day I walked in, and my roommate was delicately cutting into a brochure and pulling out a small baggie of powder. The dude had hooked up with the most low-key dealer I'd ever seen. Oh man, the stealth that some deep web dudes come up with is legendary. Low-key stealth? Comic book, still in the plastic ceiling, perfectly legit except the entire back page directly inside the cover was a sheet of acid. Super low-key stealth? A CD in a case, plastic sealed, played great music, looked totally ordinary, until you peeled back the case artwork and noticed that there was some SID tucked away in there. Almost flew under the radar and almost got thrown out stealth? Junk mail. I kid you not. Looked like a straight business-sized envelope, opened it up, official-looking bullcrap similar to what you'd see in regular old junk mail, until you noticed that the envelope had a hidden flap on the inside where there was, guess what, acid. I'm not kidding when I say the guy almost threw out the entire thing until he decided to make sure and tore the thing apart. That's not even talking about how some folks get away with powders, pills, and other type things. Collectible Pez dispensers already filled with pills, but looks like it's never even been opened, complete with the actual candy and original packaging as well. They're creative dudes, I swear. Obviously a throwaway. This is from way back, when Silk Road 1 was still going strong. I was looking for a certain substance, but couldn't find it in my part of the world for a decent price. Posted my request on the forum, and after a few days, someone messages me with an offer. For some reason, I accepted it and sent him around $200. Of course, I got scammed. I didn't think much of it, but posted a warning to others about this guy, saying he scammed me out of $200. A few days later, I get a message in my inbox saying something like this. Hey, I'm a vendor and this guy tried to scam me too. He just ordered an ounce of MDMA from me and an ounce of sweet sugar crystals are on the way to his mailbox. Please send me your BTC address and I will send you the $200 he scammed you out of. The next day, I had my $200 back and a deep respect for the dark web community. TLDR, guy scams me out of $200, someone else scams him of $700 and refunds me my money. And for the record, yes, he meant literal sugar crystals. It wasn't drug jargon. Back when internet relay chat was on its way out and peer-to-peer was in its infancy, I tried to download The Sims via a private FTP. The guy I downloaded from found a Trojan on my computer and walked me through how to remove it. I would take a bullet for that dude. Silk Road, circa 2013. Purchased what was promised as a, quote, mind-blowing experience. Received a dustbuster 2 days later. Strangely, no complaints on my end. There was a German man selling pretzels. Just pretzels. I feel like this is a great way to add a layer of mystique to your product if you're a pretzel maker. Pretzels so good they can't be sold in stores. Pretzels so good they're listed alongside the experimental drugs. Way back in the day, beyond the terms of a statute of limitations, you used to be able to use Kazaa and LimeWire and stuff to look at people's entire computers, since they were stupid and set the entire computer to share. I used to send out an email a day to random people, pointing out that the pictures of them screwing their husband/wife/girlfriend, etc., and their social security number were freely available, along with instructions on how to uninstall Kazaa/LimeWire. DIY vasectomy kit on Silk Road. It was a kit of weird dentist tool looking hooks and some tube thing. $20. The best thing about AmITheA is that you don't have to go to sketchy websites or risk getting arrested to subscribe to the content. Same goes for AmITheJerk too, linked in the description below. Remember to like the video, subscribe, and thanks for watching. Found someone selling a, quote, wish pill online. Basically, you take the pill, make a wish, and it's supposed to make it come true. It just made me laugh how much they were trying to sell it off as something real. They made up fake elements that were supposedly found in nature and showed videos of them, quote, making the pill, which was really just a bunch of blue lights being flashed at the screen. They were selling it for $100 a pill. Sad thing is, there were probably a few idiots who actually bought it. Got bored about 4 years ago and wanted to see what I could find. Lots of tables with seemingly useless information, people selling drugs, people screwing animals, and vice versa. Found a few white supremacist sites, and lots of cheese pizza. Honestly, it's not as exciting as a lot of people make it out to be. There are plenty of, quote, hitmen, but I'm guessing 90% of them are cops or a scam. If you are looking to get arrested, there are CP links everywhere. A lot easier to find than I had expected, but I never actually looked at them. Plenty of drugs, some guns. There's plenty of snuff, but you can find snuff on Reddit, so it's not anything special. Overall, I wasn't looking to get arrested, so I didn't do anything besides browse the hidden wiki. Fun story, I used Tor in middle school to get past the websites that were blocked so I could play Congregate. You had to enable Flash for it to work because obviously you needed to play Flash games, but you aren't supposed to enable Flash on Tor because it allows you to be traced. I didn't really care though because I was only using it for Congregate. I miss Congregate. I miss it so bad. I wish Flash games were real again. This was back before Google. Web pages were, for the most part, still very basic HTML with JavaScript. Hardly anyone used CSS. Only discussion boards and some banking sites had anything approaching mature front-end/back-end combinations. Real deep web story, not just one about illicit activities online. I was browsing random blogs, GeoCity sites, and the like, just going from link to link. Eventually, I came upon an odd page. It appeared to be random thoughts from different people, but for the time, it was very well designed. The messages seemed to be cryptic in nature, like several people trying to pass secret notes. I started through the source, and hidden in the comments of a JavaScript were various IP addresses. I gathered all the IPs in a text file and began enumerating. Some were routers with banner messages I could telnet to. almost all at universities. Quote, "Warning, this is a secure system at University of blah blah." The default Cisco credentials from back in the day worked on most of them, but I didn't poke around. A few of the IPs were web browsers with little to nothing on them, mostly Apache on Linux or some BSD, at least one IIS server I can recall. I finally came upon a web server with a huge directory of HTML files and TIFF images, with a few smaller subdirectories containing the same. NSLOOKUP returned no reverse records for the IP. A visual route traced it as far as Colorado. The HTML files appeared to be records a psychologist or similar mental health professional would keep. The images were of faxes, apparently of both military and medical nature. As I browsed from a subdirectory back to the parent, at the top of was a new HTML file named something like 1-hellothere.html. The timestamp was from right that minute. I opened it, and in plain text was the message, quote, "We see you." No quotes, all lowercase. About 15 seconds later, the server dropped. Got it at a friend's urging. Was on it for a while until I stumbled onto a site dedicated to random animal facts. It had no design or anything. It was just black text on a white background listing off animal factoids. I was on it for a good 30 minutes before going, "The heck am I doing?" and uninstalled Tor. I saw someone offering a cure for herpes on Agora. When the drugs arrive and you look in the mail and the only thing going through your head is, "Holy crap, I can't believe there are drugs in my mailbox that someone shipped me." It's a high in and of itself.
One day, I entered one of the deep websites and found a lot of ebooks.
The end. I was 19 and wanted to buy a fake ID, but found out that you had to buy Bitcoin and I didn't feel like figuring it out, so I gave up. This was maybe a year or so before Bitcoin blew up. I could be living on the moon right now, but I didn't feel like it. Yeah, about that. I'm gonna have to have you Google crypto crash real quick. I decided to check out one of the successor sites soon after the Silk Road was busted. They had 2 or 3 crappy-looking guns for several $1,000s apiece, some weed, and a metric crapload of weird research drugs. I was hoping to see things I might recognize, like cocaine or heroin or LSD, but instead, I got random mixes of letters and numbers in various pills or powders. It was a lot less exciting than I thought it would be. Downloaded Tor, went to the hidden wiki, went to the Silk Road, wasn't interested in drugs. Found a, quote, saxophone, was just a saxophone? Found a template for counterfeiting Gucci products. Considered selling Gucci products. Found counterfeit medical degrees. Considered buying one for 999 Bitcoin. Realized that was over $50,000. Found a guy selling carrots. Like, it wasn't code for anything, he was literally just selling carrots for Bitcoin. 10 out of 10 would visit again. I was a part of the no-love deep web alternate reality game where we had to do a deep net scavenger hunt, which culminated in me driving to New York to answer a payphone at 3 a.m. That was cool. I once found a forum dedicated to sharing recordings of the automated messages that tell you the next stop on trains. People would post the recordings that they presumably made themselves, and then they would discuss them. It haunts me to this day. I have so many questions. When I was a freshman in high school, my best friend and I were very into the whole deep web thing. We had Tor and we would exchange onion ports that we had discovered and would explore them together. We saw some weird crap. Right off the bat was a site for a professional hitman, which we decided was definitely run by the FBI. We discovered a series of, quote, chans, or deep web 4chan clones. Some of those were very weird, and some of what we saw was definitely illegal. We were fascinated with those in particular because, of course, we were both ridiculous/B users at the time. Lots of disturbing and violent adult images, lots of gore, sometimes the two overlapped. We tended to stay away from that stuff. It was a pretty big buzzkill. Finding the Silk Road was cool, even though we didn't ever buy anything. Probably the weirdest stuff I ever found were the personal ads. There were bulletin boards where people would just ask to do the most deviant, incomprehensible crap to someone, or vice versa. I think about the Craigslist killer when I remember those things, and wonder how many of those people actually end up acting out those fantasies. Okay, bear with me on this one. I was in the midst of a deeply depraved self-pleasure session once when I saw a thumbnail of a chick smack dab in the middle of a giant dude circle. Thinking it was a typical gangbang, I clicked on it, because why not? What did I have to lose? I was experiencing a pretty ridiculously long dry spell at the time and was pretty dang lonely. I had done the deed to the chick for the Education Connection commercials just a few days earlier, so it wasn't like it would usher me into a new realm of perversion. Anyways, I clicked on the link expecting a gangbang, but what I found was instead much more shocking. It started out as a typical one, chick playing with herself while a bunch of dudes watched on and slowly stroked it. But then, things got weird. None of the dudes banged her. Instead, there was a glass jar that was being passed around that everyone shot into. Everyone. Like 40 dudes shot in this jar. Then it finally made its way to a dude in a chef's uniform. He came out of nowhere, pun probably completely intended, and he added the white sauce to pancake batter and made pancakes. The dude made white sauce cakes. Anyways, the chick eats the white sauce cakes while everyone watches, and the weirdest adult film I've ever seen comes to a strange, uncomfortable end. Needless to say, it was very difficult to pleasure myself to. Found out about it when Silk Road 1 got shut down, so decided to check it out and found Agora. Spent a lot of time setting up an account and decided to finally buy something, so I bought a gram of MDMA, and it all worked perfectly. Then started buying more for myself, and started buying some for friends. The next thing I know, I'm ordering ounces of MDMA at a time and thousands of LSD tabs, and pretty much every drug you can think of, plus a bunch you've never heard of. I was moving all this stuff faster than I could buy it as well, really stupidly might I add. Ended up realizing that this was going to either end by me quitting or me behind bars, so I quit while I was ahead. Ended up with over $10,000 profit and a nice little stash for myself. Bought a trip to Europe and never touched the deep web again. Had about 1,000 empty gel capsules left over, so filled a bunch of them up with glitter and gave them away so people could enjoy having their crap covered in glitter. In computer science, we often got bored and screwed around. One day, we ran into the deep web. The most disturbing site we found was a comprehensive guide for cooking women. We're not talking about a short joke here. This page had information on what body types to use for specific cuts, how to prepare these cuts, and how to cook the girl so she lives as long as possible. It horrifies me that people way worse than the freaks on Criminal Minds exist. I first learned about the deep web back in grade 10 when this really strange druggy kid in my grade was going on about it. We sat together in English and had a new teacher that wasn't quite good and didn't really know how to control the class, so the last 20 minutes or so, she would just let us do whatever. Everyone around this kid's desk, let's call him Eli, would crowd around his computer and watch him monkey around on Silk Road and other weird sites he found. No CP or anything, but drugs and hitmen and weird crap in general. I was kinda sketched out by it, so I tried to avoid looking at it all, but I listened and it was pretty screwy. Eventually, Eli decided to order drugs from some site. This was high school, so we all lived at home, so he figured he'd order DMT to his cottage, go up for a weekend, and pick it up to hide in his closet. So we typed in his address to some guy, worked out the details, and waited. Went up to his cottage the next weekend, and we all waited for his return for the stories. Eli got back, and we all ran up to him to ask if it worked. He said it didn't, and he was really mad since he had already paid the guy. He complained to whoever was selling him the drugs, and the guy was really understanding and said he'd send an even bigger package to his cottage. Eli went up the next weekend. Still nothing. The guy was very apologetic and said he'd send one more. Still nothing. Eli gave up and figured it was just a guy trying to make a quick buck. He gave up on the deep web, and that was that. Months later, he goes up to his cottage with his family and has a big dinner party with the whole complex of cottages. He's schmoozing around and overhears these elderly people talking about going to the cops. He asks why, and they tell him. They've been consistently getting shipments of drugs every week. Eli had typed in the wrong address, and the guy he was talking to had been sending more and more to the wrong people each week because he felt so bad. He was so sketched out that he quit everything and now is doing quite well for himself. Proud of him. Was on it once. Saw the usual drugs and whatnot. Then, I happened to stumble onto a blog with a non-working link that I could not confirm, but apparently, before the link stopped working, It used to be a website where you could buy human organs. Now, that doesn't seem too messed up until the blog was talking about its context. The way they got the organs was by having a team of doctors and assistants go out onto the streets to kidnap homeless people. They would put the homeless people in cages, kill them, then cut them up and sell their organs. They said their justification was that homeless people won't be missed and the police would not come looking for them. I can't confirm the validity of this website, but that is the most messed up thing I somewhat stumbled upon on the dark web. Scary stuff. Throwaway, 'cause illegalness. I was big into Bitcoin when the Silk Road thing happened, and I got into buying certain merchandise online. The first time I was very nervous about the potential of getting caught, so I decided to have the first product sent to my office. I had it addressed generically to the IT department, and my boss, who was a good friend, was going to keep an eye out on it for me. I figured this would give me enough deniability if it was intercepted. Things went very wrong. It came in, and instead of the package going to my boss, it went to his boss. Now, the company I worked for at the time is a very large behemoth with access to credit information on just about everyone in the US. Every employee is drug tested, and we have random tests. This would be a huge issue. So, I was at lunch when the package was delivered and opened. I was actually coming back when I got a call from the project manager. "Hey, so, did you have anything sent to the office?" "No, nothing. Why?" "Duh, not going to admit to this." "Nothing strange sent here?" "No." "Well, boss's boss just received a package, and it contains marijuana." Well, I had enough deniability that while plenty of people suspected me, I got off. I learned something about my boss's boss that day. He didn't tell anyone upstream about it, and rumor has it that he took it home and smoked it. Edit, hostilities people. Look, had I shipped it to my home, the worst case scenario would have unacceptable consequences. Cops can intercept the package, obtain search warrant, find plenty of incriminating evidence in my home, I'm arrested, and lose my job. This is what we call an unacceptable risk. By sending it to the office, I had deniability. I increased the risk of losing $50 worth of weed, which is inconsequential. I also completely eliminated the risk of going to jail and losing my job. Even if the company made us all take a drug test, I can easily pass those. It's called risk mitigation. You identify potential risks and find the path that has the least potential consequences. As far as why weed online, all I could find in my area was Mexican brick swag. I want a nice dro. Professors and teachers of Reddit. What's the most pretentious thing you've heard a student say? Next year, you're still gonna be here BSing, and I'm gonna be making it big in the real world. He got held back. He is not in my class this year. I deserve an A for this course because I was a model student. I've heard some whoppers, but this one came from a student who completed, I think, 2 of the 5 required papers, and both were crap, missed half of the classes, was 15 plus minutes late every time he did show up, never participated in discussions, and didn't turn in a single homework assignment. To this day, the lack of self-awareness boggles my mind. Middle schooler said, "I'm only taking Spanish so I can tell my housekeeper what she needs to do." Oh God, it was me. I was the pretentious student. I was going into the 7th grade after transferring out of a private school to a local public school. I met with a couple of my upcoming teachers to take some placement tests since I had been taking a couple of, quote, advanced courses at my Catholic school. I say advanced because, as it turned out, the only real advancing I was doing was seeing how far I could shove my head up my butt. I basically preened the entire interview process whilst dropping some heavy-handed hints about being moved up to high school. I don't remember the specifics of what I said, or most likely I won't let myself, but I definitely implied that the tests were just a waste of time and it would be best to just enroll me in 9th grade. In my Catholic school, I had been in the highest level math course for the school. My public school entrance score put me in remedial pre-algebra. I cried. A lot. 4th grader. I don't need to do good in school. I can go to any college I want. My parents are rich. The thing is, he's not wrong, but can he stay there? Mommy and daddy can pay for your classes, but if you're not passing them, that's on you, bud. Do you know who my father is? His dad was the head of the school board. No craps were given that day. I've also had a kid say, Didn't you wear that outfit last week? This was at a very wealthy school. I was half expecting that first kid to start shouting, "Potter!" Post-grad students stayed after on day 1 to tell me, "Just so you know, I'm going to be very bored in your class. But it's not your fault. I just already know everything you're going to talk about." She completed the course with a D-, failed both of her other classes, lost her funding, and now works at Panda Express. From a 20-year-old undergrad, I'm going to be an accountant. I'll never need this database stuff. Well, to be fair, they probably won't. They'll learn all about the superior power of SQL databases and all they can do with them in the modern world. Then they'll join a practice and use the same Excel documents with archaic VB macros that have been used for decades because getting accountants to adopt new technologies is like flogging a dead horse. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's like a single computer running Excel somewhere in the world that if it were to crash, it would cause the entire world to just go into flames. Not from a student, but from the student's parent. He doesn't need to do the math, because he's a prophet. Prophets don't do math. Would you make Jesus do math? Jesus was a carpenter. He knew his math. My mom pays your salary, so give me an A. I'm a professor now, but I think my favorite comment came from a classmate of mine during my master's program. We were talking about some mass media theories, and the guy starts talking about framing. His contribution began with a long-winded explanation of the concept, and ended with him saying, "This is my idea, by the way. It's something I've been working on for the last couple of months." The list of citations on the Wikipedia page on framing is about 200 sources long, dating back to the mid-1950s. I'm a 4.0 on the dean's list, so academic misconduct won't be a problem for me. I'm going to be super wary of all this guy's papers. Like, sure, people cheat out of desperation, but desperation takes 2 forms: desperate to not fail and desperate to get the A and not the A-. As a high school English teacher, I was counseling a freshman student, about 14 years old, that she should probably do some of her coursework. After all, she wouldn't want to come to her senses as a junior or senior and realize that she was a year or 2 behind in credits and wouldn't be able to graduate. Her response? "Why should I listen to you? You make about as much as a garbage man." Lots of laughing, giving high fives to friends in class. Plenty of other students to focus on in class. I just moved on to help others in class. Tough to convince a 14-year-old to think ahead. Just checked her transcript. She's about a year and a half behind in credits. It's going to be very difficult for her to graduate this year. Side note, thank you to all the sanitation workers out there. Our comparative wages aren't really the point of this memory. Wow, it would take all of my self-control not to respond, "Yeah, and the trash they deal with doesn't talk back." Professor, I'm subscribed to Am I the Genius. Why didn't you give me an A? Oh, was it because I wasn't subscribed to Am I the Jerk linked in the description below? Thanks, Professor, in this weird analogy. I'll go do that. Not personally, but while I was student teaching in a wealthy area, another teacher told me he heard a student say that their parents got them a crappy car, but it was just until they totaled it. Then, after they destroyed it and learned their lesson, they get a Ferrari. I don't understand how this would teach them a lesson. Crash your car faster so you can get a new one and possibly be injured and or die in the process? Edit, probably an assassination plot. Notre Dame has required theology classes in first year of studies. My professor was a pretty laid-back guy, so one day, we're discussing the Tower of Babel. Humans all speak the same language and get tons of stuff done. They decide to build a tower to heaven. God doesn't like that, so he makes humans speak different languages so they can't communicate or build further. The professor asks why God would do something like that, and one student raised his hand and said, "Well, it's not for us to question God." The prof gave him a bemused look and replied, "Yes, it is. We're in a theology class." It was a fun class. I went on a date with a professor at Stanford who had a student raise their hand to ask if he was qualified to teach the course, most likely because he had a southern accent. I doubt they asked him that when he taught at Georgia Tech. I got a 77 for my final grade. Why didn't you bump me up to a B? This was after she didn't turn in the last 3 homeworks and had to have an extension on her final project because she didn't finish. My wife teaches a class where you literally have to show up and that's your grade. She understands athletics, family emergencies, etc. She had a student come in at the end of a semester and whine about the grade he got, a D, I think. The kicker? He flat out told her the reason he missed so much was because he was napping. He was lucky he got the grade he did. Clarification: the class in question is a performance class. You literally show up to practice for the performances, and that's your grade. As a learning management system admin, I hear all kinds of crazy stuff during grade appeals. Last semester, a couple of kids on a sports team were cheating in a class. Each of the 5 would take turns taking the test first online and then in succession, so that while one may not get a great score, the rest usually did. So, the instructor asks how to resolve the issue. We make the 30-question test randomized from 100 question pools. Immediately following the next test, we have a meeting with the dean. Apparently, the students felt it was unfair. Nothing happened to us or them, but the fact that they actually filed a complaint because the test couldn't be cheated on amazed me. Edit. Well, there went my inbox. So to answer some questions. Number 1. Blackboard is the #1 LMS provider in the world. Can it be terrible? Yes, if done wrong. Number 2. Random tests are not unfair if the questions are pulled from the information you are covering in class. Number 3. Yes, prevention of showing test results is an option, but does nothing if they are all in the same room just staring at the first student's computer and taking down the questions. This is why we randomized it. Number 4. There are lots of ways to tell if people are cheating. The easiest is how long it takes them to answer questions. Test start and end times also play a role. So in this case, one person would log in, take the test, and then show the results to the others. The rest would all log in at the same time and begin to answer a pretty difficult test very quickly. Number 5. They had no actual justification to complain, and they still filed a complaint. That's the nature of college. People complain about everything. If they can find a loophole, they will exploit it. Probably too late to the party, but I'm a high school art teacher. I was talking about art influences, and a kid said, "I'm not influenced by anyone. The only art I like is my own." Okay, kid. Oh man, I have a story about this. I was in the fine arts program at a state college. Had a classmate, Dawn. She was a quote, perpetual student, meaning she'd been in college for 10 plus years. She was over 30 in classes with 19-year-olds. We were in a figure drawing class together. Dawn was doing some god-awful rendition of the figure model, and the professor steps up and gives her some pointers. We were completing a specific assignment, not just doing whatever, but Dawn was drawing something way out of left field and unrelated to the figure study. Anyway, so the prof steps in and is talking to her very politely about how it's figure drawing time and not glitter glue stick time, and Dawn just looks at her and says, "But that's just not how I do my art." Professor was dumbfounded and I was cracking the heck up. Like, if you're not going to learn different art styles, why are you in an art class? Some context. It's a private Catholic school, but not the safest/best around. I was suggesting to a student to stop wearing their watch because it might be stolen. Quote, "But this is just my everyday Rolex." Student turned in his final paper, and instead of responding to one of the prompts, he wrote his paper on how much he hated the class and how terrible we were as teaching staff. I gave him a B because, while he didn't answer a prompt, he backed his claims up with evidence, which is well above average work compared to his classmates. All the same student. My dad said I don't have the personality to be a nurse. I need to be a doctor. I don't have time to join any student organizations. I'm married. I'm gonna make all A's this semester. Oh, that academic warning? I took care of that. She had a mediocre GPA, hadn't made good grades in science and math classes. Unless her dad built the medical school, she wasn't getting in. And that academic warning was totally legit. I spoke with her professor, and he laughed for quite a while when I told him that she said she would make an A. He said she might pass with a C- if she was lucky. The kicker? Her husband then called our office and threatened to get us all fired for daring to tell his precious wife something she didn't want to hear. Gave us a deadline to apologize to her before we called the president of the university to file his complaint about our behavior. Looked him up on Facebook. One of my teacher's assistants is an excellent Facebook stalker, and he works at a local bike shop. Not even a student at our university. We turned the voicemail over to campus police, and they had a chat with him. Update, May 2017. After 2 changes of major and 3 or 4 changes of pre-health designation, pre-med, pre-dent, pre-PA, whatever else, this student finally graduated. She is going to go to the local community college in the fall and start their respiratory therapy program. If she found her passion, then I'm happy for her. Yes! These are my favorite stories. I love the ones that have happy endings. I once overheard a student in the college-level science major-specific class that I teach say, "I wonder if this teacher will be able to tell me something I don't already know." And apparently I did, because he failed the class with a 32%. Edit. Okay, wow, this blew up overnight, but 2 things. 1, I did not fail him or discriminate against him in any manner because of his arrogance. He just failed. 2, I have an 87% pass rate for my class. I teach a biology class that many only take if they want to major in biology or organic chemistry, so it isn't often that I get students passing through who are unmotivated or are bored by the material. I'm a good professor and certainly try my best to help my students succeed, but sometimes they either can't or won't. I don't really need to learn this kind of basic accounting. I'm definitely going to get a job at Goldman Sachs. To me, his TA. Spoiler, based on his grades, this kid was definitely not getting a job there. I don't deserve an F, you frickin' prick! I know, but it's as low as I can give you. Source, email between my dad and one of his more charming students. Edit, it is worth noting that I never knew who the student was, just that the exchange had taken place. As another commenter mentioned, it was the student who sent an email regarding his/her grade. In regard to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, we're fine. We're the only students who have a chance of passing the AP exam, so you should just focus on us. She was referring to herself and 3 other classmates. She was also loud enough for the entire class to hear. Edit. For everyone asking if she was right, the class I taught had 20 kids. In my opinion, 16 of them had a shot at passing, but only 6 passed, including 3 from her group. One of the kids who wasn't in her group beat all their scores with a 5. So no, I don't think she was right. She also said at the end of the year, "You know, Mr. Chief Lazarus, it's gonna be your fault if I don't get into the college I wanted since you didn't give me an A." Unfortunately, this happens a lot in schools where standardized testing is tied to big funding increases. So-called high kids and bubble kids receive all the attention, ensuring they will pass and teachers' efforts aren't wasted on other students. Maybe this kid was a jerk, or maybe they've been isolated and focused on during their whole academic career and they thought that this was just how the system worked. Edit, for people telling me I'm wrong, my source is my experience as a high school teacher. Our testing facilitator sat me down and told me which kids to work with during testing seasons. It was basically the top 30 to 50% of any given class. Everyone else was ignored because she assumed they wouldn't score high enough to help us hit our numbers. Your school or district may be different. This was mine. When I used to teach first grade, we had our school-wide open house in the second week of school, so we're maybe 7 or 8 days into the year. I had a parent come up to me and ask, "So, how is my daughter doing academically compared to everyone else in here? She'll be going to an Ivy League school, so she needs to be the best student in her class." I told her that we were less than 2 weeks in and that I don't, quote, rank students for first grade. The mom was a thorn in my side for the rest of the year. I'm a student, but our teacher once gave us the whole, if you're not going to be respectful, if you think you already know the material, then just leave. A kid stands up, walks over to the door, realizes that everybody is staring at him, thinks about going to sit back down, but decides on just leaving. The teacher actually let him leave for like 15 minutes before going to get him. This was middle school, so he couldn't leave campus. My first year teaching, I subbed in a grade 10 English class. It was September, and one of the girls in the class was heavily pregnant, so would have gotten pregnant in grade 9. All they had to do in this period was write 1 page about themselves. Easy sub lesson. So I'm walking around checking work, and this girl and her group have done crap all. So I pop over to them and remind them they only have 20 minutes left and need to get something written on their page. Without a pause, the girl looks up at me and says, "Miss, Jesus didn't write his own Bible now, did he?" I just walked away. And Mary didn't screw anyone to get pregnant. Finish your essay. This one's sad, but a high school kid showed me his Patek Philippe watch, told everyone it's $18,000 and worth more than his teacher. His dad gave it to him. Dad, or mom, never came to PTA. Didn't answer calls or respond to his grades or notes home. He stayed with a different family. His parents vacationed without him. Just give me the exam. I already know all you tell me. I've been doing this for 4 years back home. I mean, wood framing and concrete. My trade I teach is steel stud framing, drywall, taping, etc. No concrete or wood framing. Never mind the fact that the apprenticeship itself is 4 years. From a senior who can barely read or write after I told him he needed to check his essay for spelling/grammar errors. Whatever, man. I'm gonna come back here in 5 years and make way more than you. I said, considering that I'm a public school teacher, I certainly hope that he will make more than me. This is from a 16-year-old student arguing about the grade she earned on a research paper. My essay doesn't need any citations because my opinions are fact. I have never, in my life, been consumed with the urge to backhand a child more than this one right here. I gave a student a C on a philosophy paper, and she says to me, "Do you know who my father is?" To this day, I have no idea, but the grade didn't change. We're gonna end this with a wild one. I have a student that refuses to do anything the way other students do it. He's never been able to make a single, regularly scheduled workshop or presentation 3 years now. Oh, medical school prerequisites? They don't apply to him. He once requested that I come in on a Saturday to meet with him because my regular office hours, quote, didn't work for him. He was my student for 2 years, but now that he's an upperclassman, he is handled by one of my colleagues. I warned her. She didn't believe me. Until he walked into her office this morning to tell her he can't make any of the required workshops he needs to attend, but since he already filled out the paperwork, that's cool, right? He would also like us to find a way for him to graduate early because he just got engaged and wants to use his tuition money for the wedding or something. I don't know. I don't really listen to him anymore. Edit. My throwaway account now has more karma than my real account. I have to get some sleep now so I can go back to the university bright and early to mold young minds or something. I will try to remember this account and update with news of this pretentious jerkwad. But for now, the sweet, sweet release of sleep awaits. Edit 2. He just came in the office wearing skinny jeans and a fedora! Edit 3. It's been 2 months and no one will see this, but this jerkwad sent me an email the other day and spelled my name wrong. Don't send me an email asking for a favor, then spell my freaking name wrong. Spell other crap wrong, but check that you spelled the name of the person you are emailing correctly. Edit 4. 5 months since the original post. He had his committee interview. I spoke to the prof who conducted it, and she said he started off really well, but then the mask slipped and it became very obvious that he's a huge jerk. He thinks very highly of himself, even though he isn't really very accomplished. By pre-med standards, he's pretty average. He brags about things he's done like he's the only person that has ever done them. He's still trying to graduate early so he can hurry up and get married, but med schools aren't going to be impressed by that. I'm still trying to get on his subcommittee panel since I didn't interview him. Not to tank it, since I will be one of 20 people, but to see what everyone else thinks. We have far more impressive students who have accomplished a lot more, and I'm really backing their applications. And, since I have the flu, I'm headed back to bed. Edit 5, May 2017. I finally logged back into this account and had a bunch of messages asking for an update. I read the student's committee letter a few weeks ago, and it was nicer than the one I would have written. From what I heard, the subcommittee lowered the author's scores a bit since they thought she was too kind to him. They've all dealt with him at some point and find him very pretentious. It's going to be a few months before I find out his fate, but I think he graduated, I haven't checked, and is probably planning his super pretentious hipster wedding. My colleague next door now refers to him as, quote, my favorite student whenever she hears from him, in a sarcastic way. Therapists of Reddit. What was your "you must be kidding me" moment? Some of these are gross. Doctor I used to work with told me about a woman who tried to kill herself, so they put her in a safe room. She then proceeded to try and overdose on water, which he told me is possible, but really hard to do. A client was going to probate court and thought he'd dress up by putting a non-slip sock on his collar as a tie. Trying to be supportive, I told him, "Nice tie," to which he replied, "It's not a tie, it's a sock, stupid." One client of mine bites and eats his fingernails. Gross, but not unheard of. Then I learned he stores his fingernails in a box in his room to save them for a snack later. A little grosser, but he's about 9, so I'm hoping he will grow out of it. What finally made me want to vomit was learning that when anyone in his family clips their nails, fingers or toes, they give him the clippings to add to his box. So when he's eating nails from the box, they could belong to his mother, father, or siblings. Yes, I've addressed the parents about enabling this behavior, but it is still happening. Edit, thank you for all your concerns for my client. I'm aware that it seems like pica or some sort of nutrition deficiency, and for all I know, it could be. I'm a behavioral therapist and not qualified to professionally recommend medical treatments to the family. I do know his parents have taken him to several doctors for multiple different tests for disorders, so this could have been addressed and they just chose not to disclose the information to me. I used to work with children that have autism and Down syndrome, which means a lot of play therapy. I had my moment when one of my clients wanted to sit on my lap while we practiced reciting animal cards, followed with their corresponding noise. Forgot what animal noise I made that made him laugh so much that he ended up peeing on me from the laughter. That night was also date night. Intake clinician here. What brings you in today? I'm here for adult image addiction. At this point, not the weirdest thing I've heard. Let's go with that. Okay, tell me about it. I watch it 3 times a week, for 15 minutes or so at a time. My girlfriend said I'm an addict and forced me to come in. I see lots of very extreme cases, but this was so minor that it made me stop for a moment. I sent them to couples counseling. Just today, I conducted a threat assessment on the first grader who told his teacher he wanted to stab himself with a knife and die. Upon further questioning, he revealed that he and Dad watched The Walking Dead together, and last time on the show, he saw 2 people stab themselves to death because, quote, they didn't want to get eaten by the zombies. Why are you even watching that show with a 6-year-old? Had a client who he found out was storing his own poop under his bed. He would then eat his poop for a snack. Edit, so I guess I should have added why he did this. First issue, he thought he was an alien, so eating his poop had a few benefits in his mind. First benefit, we could not study his poop. Second benefit, he felt that alien poop had nutrients he could not get from our food. He would eat normal food, but we found out he felt Earth food was poison and alien poop fixed that. Third benefit, alien poop is worth a lot of money, so he did not want us to steal it. When we found out what he was doing, I got to inform him that we were taking away his poop. He kicked me. Obligatory, not a therapist, but my hyperconservative parents sent me to an addiction therapist because they found out I smoked pot occasionally in high school. The therapist they chose was a former White House drug czar, a renowned authority on cocaine addiction and hard drug abuse, and an expert on rehabilitating extreme problem cases. My parents must have spent a fortune and pulled strings to get me an appointment. The first session, he asked me what drugs I use. I told him I smoke pot like once a week, and that was it. After a few rounds of, come on, you can trust me, and we can't begin treatment until you admit your problem, he realizes that I really do only smoke pot once in a while, and literally says, you've got to be kidding me. Tell your parents you're a normal teenager and you don't need to come back. One that sticks out in my mind was a mother that brought in her 5-year-old for therapy because she was into Disney princesses, which are clearly sexual, and since a 5-year-old is non-sexual, this must clearly mean she's being inappropriately abused by a close family member. I've also worked with countless couples who have come to counseling for adultery, wherein adultery equals adult images. One client even became suicidal because she caught her husband pleasuring himself after not screwing him for months. I know everyone has different values, but come on, y'all. Friendly reminder that if you enjoyed this content, hit subscribe and like the video. It really does help. And also, subscribe to AmITheA, linked in the description below. Thanks for watching, and remember to drink some water too. I was working surveillance one night at a psych ward, keeping a close watch on a mentally ill patient. Right before my shift started, I was briefed that the patient had started eating one of the light bulbs and attacked a nurse. At around 5 a.m., he woke up and saw me sitting there at the end of his bed. I said good morning, and he didn't reply. About 15 minutes of silence went by before he stood up, stared out the window, and said, "A person is most vulnerable when taking a crap." I didn't sit back down for the rest of my shift. Social work. Not therapy, but close enough. Me. We need to think of some new ways for you to discipline your daughters other than spanking. Client. But my parents did it to me, and I turned out okay. Me. stares at this high school dropout drug addict who has spent his entire adult life in and out of jail/halfway houses, can't get a job, and has had his 3 kids removed for abuse and neglect. Okay. I actually did successfully turn this around in a gentle way and make him realize he hadn't actually, quote, turned out okay. I had a client, an older female refugee that I worked with for several months before she told me that she had court the next week and was worried because she could be deported if found guilty. She didn't tell me earlier because she was ashamed and suffered in silence. She was living with extended family, and the family got busted for smuggling and selling khat, a stimulant narcotic. The family determined that she would take the fall for her husband and sons who were behind the operation. At the arrest, the police brought an interpreter for a different language from a different ethnic group in a different country than the client was from. On top of that, she said the police didn't have an interpreter present during the questioning at the station, and she waited there for almost 2 days until they found an interpreter for her language. I asked her if she understood what was happening, and she said her lawyer, public defendant she met once, told her she would be deported. Beyond that, she had no understanding of the situation, process, etc. I had seen her psych evaluation stating that she had the cognitive equivalent of a 7-year-old, so I told her that we have information that could help her case and that her lawyer should see it as soon as possible. This was on a Friday, court was on Wednesday, and the client didn't know the name or any information about her public defender. We got a friend to help her collect the information. The client brought it to me on Monday, signed the ORI. Lawyer called me back that afternoon saying they've got nothing to help this poor woman even though the case seems appropriately set up. I told the lawyer that we've got a whole bunch of insight and data and records that will get the charges dropped. I didn't work Tuesdays and was going nuts worrying and hoping everything would get to where it needs to and in the hands of the people who need to see it. On Wednesday, news from court comes that all charges were dropped. I used to get all kinds of things sprung on me at the last minute, then have to perform all kinds of bureaucratic trapeze maneuvers to alter the outcome of high-stakes situations. I wrote so many letters. I was hired to be a mental health provider, but I ended up doing tons of case management because nobody else wanted to. Have a master's in clinical psychology and currently working towards my doctorate. I laughed reading this question because I feel like I have at least one of those moments per day at my clinic rotations, regardless of type of setting. One that stood out the most was when I was working a camp for children with various psychological disorders, most with some sort of behavioral concerns. The girl I was paired with had a history of aggressive and violent tendencies. We went the whole day without any problems. That was, until we were doing some group physical activity to wind down and focus before leaving for the day. She didn't like that this meant no longer playing with a certain toy, so she took off her shoe and threw it at the little boy in front of her. He had autism and immediately started crying and screaming. While someone helped him, I turned to the girl to explain to her what she did was wrong. As I turned towards her, she punched me square in the face, then grabbed a hold of my hair. Managed to pull out a good chunk. I'm about 5'1", and this girl was maybe 1 or 2 inches shorter than me and had about 20 pounds on me, despite being 9 years old. Trying to get a safe physical restraint was difficult and comical to say the least. Finally got some help from other staff, and we were able to calm her down after about 15 minutes. The kicker was, when we told her mom what happened, she basically dismissed the entire thing and laughed about it. So frustrating, because you know this kind of thing is reinforced at home as there is no punishment. The girl then starts hitting her mom, who grabs and holds down her arms. The little girl laughs, looks at me, and the other staff member, and says, "Ugh, a little help over here? Are you going to let her do this to me? She's hurting my arm." I went home and did this weird laugh/cry for a few hours. Luckily, you learn pretty quickly not to take things personally and move on, so things were back to normal the next day. I do occasionally look back at that day just baffled at how quickly that whole situation escalated. Most of the other moments that come to mind involve poop in some capacity. I work in a community residence for adults with mental illness. Most of them are very capable and independent. One girl, 27 years old, constantly acts really dumb for sympathy and will do dumb things because she can, I guess. First week she was admitted, she tripped on something getting out of bed. She's 5'1" and like 200 pounds, and she fell on her foot and broke some of the small bones in the foot. I take her to get her cast, and she gets the usual don't get the cast wet, use your crutches, elevate, blah blah blah. Since her bedroom was on the second floor, we had to send her back to her mother's house for a few weeks since she would not be able to exit the building in time in case of emergency. Well, 5 days later, the shoe/boot thingy to put over your cast comes in, and we call her up saying we'll bring it over. Her response? Well, I don't think it'll fit. Why not, we ask. Because I cut my cast off. I got it wet, and it was too tight. They didn't give her a second cast, and she never used her crutches, claiming they were unstable and she would fall and get hurt if she used them. Her foot never healed properly, and 2 months later, she fell and broke it again. Edit, since you all have questions. She didn't get a second cast because A, she would have to pay for it herself and she didn't have the money, and B, doctors did not want to give her another plaster cast, fearing she would just cut that off too. Other options for a cast insurance wouldn't cover. Number 2. Yes, being 5'1" and 200 pounds is severely overweight. Many times, people with mental health issues come from low-income backgrounds. Often, people with mental illness are overweight due to lack of good healthcare and know-how to lose weight themselves. Number 3. I can tell she acts stupid on purpose for several reasons. Mostly that when she thinks we're not watching, she slips up and behaves normally and makes actual intelligent decisions. Also, she's told us she thinks guys like her more if she's stupid, and she gets lots of sympathy from people for how stupid she is. Number 4. To the person who said she might likely lose the foot, she's told us she wants her foot amputated because then it wouldn't hurt so much. Logic. My client told me his family didn't appreciate his interest in guns, to which he proceeded to tell me he is always carrying. He then places his gun on the table in front of me and asked if it made me nervous. It did, but we focused more about why he wanted to know if I was nervous, and I brought it back around to his family. From then on, I made sure to always have access to a door and never put the client between the door and myself again, just to be safe. This recently happened to me. I have a client who is a daily methadone doser. During our last session, he complained of sleep issues. Delving into this new issue, he described his solution to me. He saves his spit in a jar to drink at night when he is unable to sleep. Saves his spit in a jar to drink later. I'm a therapist and have a few of these stories, but this story was actually told to me by a therapist friend of mine. He said that he was working in a mental hospital a few years ago, and he and other staff had heard a loud scream from down the hall. They ran to go check it out and got to a patient's room to see blood all over his face and hand, and realized he had torn his own eyeball out. They tried to defuse the situation and start looking around for the eyeball. They couldn't find it. He had eaten his own eyeball. Edit, I don't know the reason the patient gave for eating and or removing his eye, but I will say it takes a pretty severe level of psychosis for a person to be able to do this. Honestly, he was probably more concerned about the quote reason he needed to take his eye out than he was with the pain of it. I can't imagine the emotional pain he must have been going through to be able to get to this point. Worked one summer at a summer school for special needs children about 2 years ago when I was 14. I was just a teacher's aide, so most of what I was doing was playing with the lower maintenance children and just running errands for the teachers. One morning, I was helping the kids put their stuff into their cubbies, and one of the kids was just standing in front of his, staring at me with his lunch bag in his hands. This was one of the more violent kids who would act up at the slightest of breezes. He was about 11 or 12 and had severe autism. I asked him if he needed help putting his stuff away, and he replied with only some mumbling. I asked him to speak clearly, and he said, "I'm going to hurt you." I was really confused and asked him to repeat what he said. He then screamed at the top of his lungs, "I'm going to hurt you!" and swung his lunchbox straight for my head. Luckily, I kinda expected this thing to happen, so I was ready to duck, and he missed. I was not allowed to even touch any of the students because I was not trained to restrain them, so until the teachers got him under control, all I could do was run around the classroom as he chased me. Once the teachers restrained him, he was under control within about 10 or 15 minutes. When the teacher asked him why he did what he did, he said that he was angry because his dad didn't bring him to Denny's that morning. I was assaulted because a kid didn't get to go to Denny's. Quite common, actually. Anything outside the normal routine, and they have a meltdown. My son is autistic, and when he was younger, he'd have an absolute meltdown when the seasons changed. For the winter months, he'd obviously put on his winter jacket, hat, and gloves. Once spring came, I gave him a light coat one morning, and he fell to the ground crying and screaming because he thought he wasn't going to school. Tough days, let me tell you. Thankfully, he has amazing teachers and support, and my biggest problem now is He takes his socks off at night and throws them on the side of his huge bunk bed that I can't move. So, typical annoying kid stuff now. Forensic therapist here. I work with paroled sex offenders. One time, a guy I worked with urinated on my coworker's car in broad daylight. She was in the car. He made eye contact with her while he was doing it. His PO picked him up from group 20 minutes later. He's currently having a little vacation at a state facility. When I worked in bereavement, a client of mine used the term, quote, skid marks when discussing the accident. For some reason, there and then, the expression just caught me off guard. I joined the dots, and the corners of my mouth started to rise. In actuality, this may have only lasted a moment, but it felt like minutes. All the while I was drawing blood as I chewed down on the insides of my cheeks. I felt like the worst human being alive. Was running an addiction treatment group. Some of the participants were referred by the court, usually for a DUI. The referral conditions were simple. If they finished treatment, they would not serve time in jail for the DUI. One of these court-referred DUI participants ran a limo service and showed up to group with a tablet and cell phone. He spread things out and proceeded to treat the space as his personal office. I intervened, explaining he would not be able to conduct business while participating in the group. He gave me a look that would have killed an ordinary person, said it was a busy time of year and he really needed to stay in touch with his drivers. I told him I understood, but he still needed to put the stuff away and pay attention. Lots of eye rolling, I can't believe this lady, and he still kept checking his phone and getting up to go outside and take calls. During the break, I told him his behavior was disruptive and he would have to leave. This seemed to make him happy, until I added I will be telling the judge he did not complete treatment. For the first time, he seemed to slowly realize he was there for a reason and might actually end up in jail because of his behavior. He apologized and asked to stay, and he settled down after that. Had a patient who swallowed things as a self-injuring behavior. This individual would swallow anything metal and pointy, usually as a way of getting into the hospital or to stay in the hospital. At one point, they wanted to get surgeries or procedures to have the objects removed, but they didn't actually want to die. One instance where they almost died after ingesting a series of closed safety pins that ended up opening inside their stomach stopped them from eating things that wouldn't pass. Anyway, so this person was upset that they were getting discharged as they wanted to stay until the beginning of the month. Hate to say it, but it's not uncommon to see people come in because they are out of benefits for the month. The usual complaints of wanting to die weren't working because we know this person doesn't actually want to die. So they went and swallowed the iron for the Monopoly game. It didn't work, we still discharged them, but ever since then, we haven't been allowed to have board games on the unit without staff supervision. Had a client who was told he absolutely had to start losing weight else he would become troublingly diabetic and begin losing appendages. He didn't put much effort in, eventually having his foot amputated. Time after time I saw him, I had to explain that having a foot amputated did not count as half a stone towards his weight loss targets. He was genuinely mortified. Had a patient once with auditory hallucinations. They suddenly decided I was, quote, the voice, and they had to do whatever I said. So, I encouraged them to do positive things for others, and always be nice to their mother. You know, now I actually am curious. If there's anybody listening to these videos out there with schizophrenia, how does that affect you? Do the voices affect you in a positive way? Do they tell you to do positive things? Or are these hallucinations always negative? Let me know in the comments. I was working with a woman who had struggled with alcohol throughout her life and during her pregnancies. She denied drinking while pregnant, but 2 of her children were born with fetal alcohol syndrome. She was seeing me in session to process her reaction to receiving letters from her children that basically called her out for being a bad mom and saddling them with the disease because she drank. She was really defensive and said, I don't know why they're mad at me, because everyone knows you get fetal alcohol syndrome from the dad. Not sure if deflecting or just that uninformed. It was pretty memorable when a histrionic patient leapt onto my desk so I could better appreciate her new sneakers. College Redditors, what's the one high school habit each incoming freshman needs to stop doing on their first day of college? I'll start. No longer are you required to raise your hand and ask to use the restroom. Just get up and leave quietly. Don't wear shirts with your high school name, graduation date, class motto, etc. If you sit in the front row with the laptop, actually pay attention. Do not use Facebook, Reddit, or play Tetris. If you're sick, you don't need a note from your parents. Don't eat loud food in class. Please, please, please follow this one. Don't talk loudly in class. People are there to learn. Keep your high school GPA, sports accomplishments, SAT/ACT scores, and awards to yourself. No one cares. Oh, you were in an AP class? No one cares. You were popular in high school? No one cares. You were a nerd in high school? No one cares. You think your professor is a jerkwad? No one cares. You were prom king? No one cares. In essence, don't take yourself too seriously. Approach college with a sense of humbleness. Don't boast too much about your old self in high school. For the record, when they say no one cares, they don't mean that none of that matters or is worth nothing. It just means that it's not going to affect the friends you make or the activities you participate in. For me, at least, college was a time where I really started to come out of my shell. High school doesn't matter anymore, despite all my dreams taking place there. Your life isn't over if you walk into class late. Just calmly go in and take a seat. You'll be fine. Yes, it will be on the test. After a test, you don't have to stick around. Pack your stuff up and leave quietly. If you're struggling, don't wait to get help. Seriously, if your school is halfway decent, there's at least one other resource outside of your professor that you can consult for tutoring. You will regret letting your pride and/or laziness get in the way of passing a class. Finally, if professors offer to read rough drafts of papers, send or take them a rough draft. Not only will you get suggestions tailored to your professor's grading tendencies, but your professor is also aware that they told you your paper is fine, quote, except for. So if they said that one paragraph looked fine and then realized later it should have been expanded on in some detail, they will probably be more lenient. You sought help, they missed it. Oh well. Besides, you'll become a much better writer hearing suggestions from multiple sources. My essay writing has improved significantly because of my professor's input. Edit. So, I forgot this was about habit breaking. Here's a habit to break, so I'm actually answering a question. Don't sleep in class or otherwise ignore your professor. The lectures generally emphasize what your professor thinks is most important and what will be stressed on your tests. Besides, they usually have funny or interesting stories that revolve around the topic. It's fun stuff. Edit 2. Since it seems to be getting mentioned a lot, there are instances in which you do stay after the exam. I suspect, however, your professor will mention it in those circumstances. If in doubt, just ask the professor beforehand. Making up excuses to a professor if you miss the due date for an assignment. It isn't that they aren't listening, it's that they simply will not care. Stop being so embarrassed when your family phones you or comes over. They probably live very far away and came here to see you. Show them some love. Professor here. Number 1. Don't plagiarize. We'll catch you. If we do, fess up. The first several times, the student said, I don't know how that happened. Remember that uncommon knowledge should be cited. Number 2. If the prof asks you to come in for help, do it. We can't help you if you don't. Number 3. I can't tell you how many, quote, smart kids have dropped out. If you get so behind that you feel overwhelmed, talk to someone, anyone, and everyone until you get back on track. You may need professional help. Number 4. Get involved. The more connected you are, the better you'll do. Number 5. Live on campus if you can. Why? See number 4. Number 6. You'll get some great professors and some crappy ones, no matter what school you go to. If all of them are great, let me know and I'll put my application in. I'm not being egotistical. I just don't like having uncomfortable conversations with students about their bad professors. Also, who one student feels is awful may end up being your favorite. Number 7. Take advantage of electives. Try something you may never get to try again. No more raw dogging it. Please wear a condom. This may seem kind of random and out of the blue, but seriously, college campuses are one of the easiest ways to get STDs. There's no shame in nabbing a free condom if there's a table giving them away. The worst habit you can get into is not being safe. You definitely need to study. If you had it easy in high school, it likely will not be that way in college. Putting your phone on vibrate is not the same as putting your phone on silent. Everyone can hear your phone buzz. Everyone can also see you texting during lecture. Hiding your phone under your desk fools no one. Putting on makeup in the middle of class? No one cares anymore. Some people just drag themselves out of bed wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. I actually have a couple tips about this. Number 1. In my acting classes, it was actually standard to wear comfortable clothing like sweatpants and t-shirts. We do a lot of posing, stretching, laying on the floor, etc., so it was important to wear something that you could actually move in. Tip: if you're signing up for an exercise, acting, or dance class, read the syllabus. It is your professor's Bible. Number 2. I was a soundboard operator for a play that had a morning performance, and I ended up waking up about 5 minutes before showtime, so I had no time to get ready. I bolted to the building in my oversized t-shirt and bright red flannels, did my job, and went back to my dorm. Tip: be sure to set your alarm. And also, nobody cares about what you're wearing. I've seen people in class with rainbow He-Man t-shirts on. It's all part of the experience. Stop checking Facebook every 3 seconds. It's amazing how much time it will free up for you. Don't shout out snide comments during class trying to get people to laugh. We don't care if that's what she said. We just want to learn. Here's a tip. After you subscribe to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below, don't watch us during class, but you do get brownie points for liking the video and turning on notifications. Thanks for watching. Number 1. Be ready to change your major if you need to. What you actually do in a given field of study is often radically different than what you'd imagine. Had a friend go into physics, spent the last 2 years of his degree programming simulations. Switch early enough, and you won't have too many headaches. Number 2. You can sneak into other classes. No one is going to stop or even notice you. Do this a lot, and you'll eventually be able to talk about just anything. Number 3. Use the library. Steal from databases. Outside of college, knowledge is expensive, and libraries are sorely underfunded. Number 4. Most clubs are kind of BS. Attend anyway. Catch a couple club members outside of the meetings, get a couple drinks in with them, and you'll probably get something closer to what you were looking for. Number 5. Even if you're living off of your folks, if you can swing a part-time job, get one. Having a bit of scratch makes having a social life a lot easier, and it's going to stay that way after you graduate, regardless of how cozy you are. Having a social life makes having an intellectual/professional life a lot easier too. The right friends can do wonders for your academic performance. Number 1. Make as many friends as possible. Number 2. Introduce yourself to your professors. You go from number 8675309 to name. Number 3. No one is in a clique anymore. If they are, screw them. Number 4. If you aren't going to pay attention in class, don't disrupt your classmates with internet conversations or texting. 4.5. Professors can easily pick out people not paying attention and will most likely assume that you do not care about your grade. Number 5. Don't fall victim to no more parents, no more rules, especially on food. Number 6. Going home ain't nothing, but keeping in contact with your parents is. Number 7. Find stuff to involve yourself in, but don't involve in all the things. Number 8. You will meet a crap load of people. Even if you don't like them, don't burn the bridge. Number 9. There will always be someone smarter than you. Don't play know-it-all. Maybe not a habit, but a lesson. And I'm sorry if this is a bit negative or heartbreaking. There will be classes that, no matter how hard you try, you will be terrible with. I enrolled as an aerospace major because I wanted to change the world, despite being more of a history/English person. I, by some miracle, passed my second calculus class with a D. I had absolutely no hope with my third calculus class. I had a tutor, I went to study sessions, I went to office hours, I was housed with engineers. But at that point, nothing could teach me how to get from point A to point B. It was basically magic, with some loose logic here and there. I failed that class, despite all my effort. I'm not saying that you will also fail, but that there will be classes that will be nearly impossible to ace. It's very difficult to get all-around A's. But maybe that's just my engineering school. Here, the engineering average GPA is just over 2.0, I believe. And, no exaggeration, the average math test score is 50% or below, so curving is completely necessary. And always check the class average before you panic and wait for the curve. I got a 23 out of 100 on my Calc 2 exam once. The class average was a 10 out of 100. My 23% became an A. You're going to class, not the club. Alternatively, to those same students about 2 months later, you're going to class, not to bed. Giving a crap about what your peers think about you, and having opinions about your peers based on trivial things like whether or not they wear their varsity jacket. But stop asking random people for a piece of gum when they take it out of their bag. Get your own gum. Try not to screw up your grades your first year, or you spend the next 3+ trying to make up for it. Also, get involved, but don't overdo it. Not everyone could be involved in and the president of every organization on campus, but try something. Don't just go to class and then screw around in your room. Buy into the whole college experience, please. No, it's totally true. The first year is the easiest to screw up. I spent more time worrying about a particular extracurricular and the fact that suddenly there were parties, tiny high school, barely any social life, and my grades really suffered. Every semester after the first 2, I got better and better grades, but they ruined the pretty average score overall. Can confirm I bombed my first semester, but every semester after that just got better and better. As long as you have people around you to support you, something as new and scary as college won't be as scary. Don't bother sucking up to the professors. While in high school nobody liked teachers' pets, being one could legitimately give you an advantage. In college, you are one of thousands of students that your professor sees daily. If you become the classic suck-up, you're probably not going to be well liked by your classmates, and the professor will just see you as one out of many students, or, worst case scenario, as a bothersome jerk. Don't be afraid of asking your professor anything you don't understand. While they're held to a much higher standard than your normal teachers, they're still human. That doesn't mean you should interrupt them in the middle of a lecture. What I'm saying is that there's nothing wrong going to the professor after class to clear up your doubts. Expect failure. It doesn't matter if you're smart or even a genius. You're going to a whole different environment. It really is a whole new world you're entering, and getting used to it can be tough for some. The world won't end if you get a C on your first test, so chill. For the love of Godzilla, do not call them anything other than professor. Don't call them Mr., don't call them teach, or anything of the sort. Sidebar, this really does depend on the professor. A lot of the professors at my college were on a first-name basis. That's what I love so much about my campus's theater department. Let's go! One last thing. If you're doing any sort of illegal activity, trust no one. I'm not kidding here. Some people will gladly rat you out. Maybe they're prudes that are jealous of you, or maybe they're against what you're doing. Be completely sure you trust who you're hanging out with. You have no idea how many headaches this will avoid. Not giving a crap. I didn't give a crap throughout high school and graduated with the 1 point something or another. I had no intention of going to college. Spent 10 years in the workforce. Made nothing of myself. Job hopped every year. The last job I had was the longest. I worked there for 2 years. I was up for a promotion that was then given to a guy 6 months my junior because he had a degree. At that point, I quit my job and enrolled in community college. The university wouldn't take me. I have recently transferred to said university and am currently maintaining a 3.92 GPA, all because I finally decided to give a crap. If you have a minor disagreement with a professor or find what they're saying is just so interesting, save it for after class. The rest of us really don't give a crap. We just want to get the notes, do the classwork, get the homework, unless it's in the syllabus, and go the heck home. Don't drag us into it. It's boring, and we don't care. And sometimes the professors like to drag the rest of the class into the discussion. Edit, this doesn't apply to discussion-based classes or situations where the professor is outright wrong or inappropriate. Learn to not start a conversation with, "So what's your major?" or at least learn to phrase it differently. Personal pet peeve? Maybe. Do every bit of extra credit offered. If you can redo a bad test for extra points, do it. If you can earn extra points for volunteering at some weird event, do it. If you get extra credit for attending every class session, go to every class session. Use every advantage they give you because every single extra point counts. I'm old and back in school, but as an example, in one of my classes, I did so much extra credit that I only needed a 20% on the final to get an A in the class. That knowledge is incredibly valuable when you have 3 other finals the same week. Send thank you notes/emails to the professors you love, the ones that have made a difference or have gone out of their way to help you. Send it after the class is over and you've received your final grade to avoid impropriety, but do it and be heartfelt about it. They not only appreciate it, but at some point, You may need a reference letter if you're transferring or going on to grad school. I have 2 former professors that will stop me on campus to ask how I'm doing and offer help if I need it. Never forget reference pages. Cite everything you've looked at, even if you're not quoting or using statistics from it, and if needed, buy an APA extension for Word if you suck at formatting. Do not forget references ever. Do not take college like it's on autopilot. It isn't set up for you like high school. You set up your classes, professors, and schedule. Take advantage. Screen your classes and professors so you're not walking into stuff blind. If you end up with a crappy professor or class, you're doing it wrong. Rate My Professor is a beautiful resource. Use it. Also, ask around for recommendations from other students. Your opponent in class is stupid bullcrap. Don't take professors that are jerks or make their class hard just for the sake of doing it. If it's a class that doesn't pertain to your major, find the Easy Prof and take their class. Bank your Easy A for GPA support. If it's a major-related class, get good professors whose classes are only as hard as they need to be. I dissent from the advice here about not being a teacher's pet. I suggest it. Don't kiss up, but take excuses to have sidebar conversations with your professors. Geek out with them. They will think more positively of you, and it can show up in your grade. Not all professors in college grade on purely mathematical formula. As someone who grades a lot of papers and essays, please let me urge you, do not, I repeat, do not fall into the crowd that sets up, quote, teams for classes. I see this all the time, where people say, okay, I'll go Monday, you go Wednesday, etc., and share notes. You are paying to go to class, so go to class. There are a lot of people who do this and get away with it, but you will very likely end up hurting yourself in the long run. You might hurt yourself in the way of not doing as well on a test because your friend didn't take the best notes, in the way of not preparing in a prerequisite class for a later class down the road, or you may be violating the school's academic integrity code. I just want to take a quick second to address that last one because it's very important, and I think a lot of the people who screw up simply didn't take it seriously. Most universities have a zero-tolerance policy for cheating. You may think you're getting away with it, but I want to warn you. Teachers/professors do not need to tell you when you're caught. You can go the whole semester thinking you're safe, then suddenly get a nasty letter informing you that you need to go see the Academic Affairs Council. At that point, you are almost certainly hosed, and penalties are usually as severe as possible to use as an example. Please do not underestimate this. It's a lot more serious than high school. Furthermore, if you are farther along in your studies, you can permanently blacklist yourself in the world of academia, potentially losing job opportunities or the ability to go to grad school, which is becoming increasingly necessary. Stop thinking that you're the smartest kid around. You might have been the valedictorian of your high school or whatever, but just because you were the smartest kid there doesn't mean that you're the smartest kid in college. Chances are, everyone else at the school is just as smart as you, if not smarter. Also, don't skip on homework/studying. I was one of those students in high school that rarely did his homework, and I still got good enough grades based on exams that I never had to study for. But in college, those assignments tend to count for a much bigger part of your grade, and most of the time, that homework is going to be much more helpful than high school homework. If you skip the homework, you're likely to have no idea what's going on. As for studying, the exams are much more difficult, and for some classes, the only grades you get are test grades. Mess up on the midterm? Well, you're screwed, since the only other grade is the final. You can't afford to do poorly on one exam, since there's rarely more assignments to buffer your grade. Don't see your professors as, quote, teachers. And in no way do I mean that they're not those who teach, but I mean the fact that, at least for me and many I know, throughout your school career so far, the teachers have been viewed as these much older, almost untouchable people who have this huge status over you. Once I got into college, however, every professor I've had has been very approachable about everything. It feels like talking to an actual human being versus someone who could ruin your life by a single word or sentence. TLDR, don't be afraid to talk to your professors like a normal person. Do not buy your books until you know you are going to use them. I have been swindled one too many times by professors that put expensive textbooks on their required reason lists and never reference them. Along those same lines, never buy textbooks for the campus bookstore. It is ever so much cheaper to order them from Amazon or some similar site. In addition, don't crap on majors that you view as useless or pointless. Telling people, what are you going to do with X degree? Make coffee? is not a good way to make friends. Yeah, I've literally had professors be like, hey, I found the textbook you need for this class online as a free PDF, and I'm sending it to the entire class so you don't have to spend $100 on textbooks. Here you go. Those professors are so goated. I love them so much. Thank you. History buffs of Reddit, what is one of the most fascinating stories you've learned that no one seems to talk about and can't be found in textbooks? The Lake Peigneur disaster. Until 1980, Lake Peigneur was a small-ish, freshwater lake with a maximum depth of about 10 to 15 feet, located in southern Louisiana. Locals mostly used it for trout fishing, and it also had a canal running 10 miles from the lake southward to the Gulf of Mexico. The main industry of the area was a massive salt mine that stood below the ground, partially underneath the lake itself. Thing is, natural salt deposits like this often coincide with oil reserves, so it wasn't out of the ordinary when oil companies came searching. In November of 1980, Texaco had set up a rig in the lake and was doing some exploratory drilling, hoping to make bank. Little did they know that one of their triangulation coordinates was slightly off, and so they had incorrectly guessed the location of the salt mine below their feet. Their drill bit punched into the roof of the salt deposit about 400 feet earlier than expected, and water began to drain slowly into the salt. And what happens when salt meets water? It dissolves. As the water dissolved more and more salt, it made more and more room for water to be sucked down, which in turn dissolved more salt and made more room, setting off a massive chain reaction. The oil rig on the surface keeled to the side and collapsed, its workers barely escaping before the water pressure became too much to swim through. The remnants of the rig were sucked into the bottom of the lake in what had turned from a tiny hole to a whirlpool, the force of the water shearing away soil and making a bigger hole as it went. The salt mine at the time was fully staffed with workers 1,500 feet below the ground, who were going about their daily shifts in the mine without any knowledge of the events taking place above them until they saw water dripping through the roof of the tunnels. Thanks to well-rehearsed evacuation plans, none of them died before the mine was flooded, but water is just about the worst thing you can see in a salt mine. The whirlpool on the surface, having eaten the rig, began to suck down the entire contents of the lake itself, including 11 barges, various small boats, and yes, the poor trout. The whirlpool grew into a maelstrom, its pressure increasing and in turn building more pressure by creating a bigger and bigger hole, eroding more and more of the salt mine. As it pulled down the entire lake, the water began to shear away at the shores, creating landslides and tearing trees out by the roots. Many of Jefferson Island's 100-year-old pecan trees were lost to the maelstrom, along with several local homes that sat on the shore of the lake and were ripped out by the foundation. The local botanical gardens was destroyed entirely as the soil underneath it was eroded in the span of only a few hours. Compressed air inside the mine finally exploded out through the mine shafts, quickly followed by a 400-foot geyser erupting from the mine's entrance. Not only did Lake Peigneur drain entirely into the mine, dragging 64 acres of destroyed land with it, but the pressure was so great that it also reversed the direction of the Decom Canal. The ocean water from the Gulf of Mexico rushed northward through the canal to fill the Peigneur Basin, temporarily creating the largest waterfall in Louisiana. The chaos didn't end until the pressure equalized about a week later. When things had finally calmed down, the lake had changed drastically. Its maximum depth was now about 200 feet, as opposed to its previous 10. Its shoreline had expanded, chimneys sticking straight out of the water where the houses had once been. 9 out of the 11 barges claimed by the maelstrom floated back to the surface, although 2 remained somewhere in the ground below. The botanical gardens were gone and many of the local trees. The salt mine was temporarily shut down, and although it did reopen, it was finally closed permanently in 1986. Texaco had to pay $32 million to the salt company and a further $13 million to the gardens. Miraculously, the only casualties of the disaster were the trout. The most important difference, however, is that today, Lake Peigneur is now a saltwater lake with ocean species 10 miles away from the ocean itself, all caused by some bad numbers and a 14-inch drill bit. Leave your mark on history and subscribe to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk linked in the description below. Be sure to like the video and turn on the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching! I wish more people realized how truly post-apocalyptic life after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire was. In Britain, we had large cities made of masonry, aqueducts, running water, lawyers and accountants, central heating, financial derivatives, a thriving civilization. After the collapse, we lost all of that. The plumbing and concrete broke down, nobody knew how to fix it. People built mud huts inside old stadiums and amphitheaters, using them as forts. That's some Diamond City stuff right there. It took centuries for the economy to recover to the point that currency was needed again, rather than bartering. A side point, back in the day, York and Thebes were in the same country. That still blows my mind. Starfish Prime. That time when a space nuke could be seen from Hawaii and the resulting EMP knocked out streetlights in Waikiki. Almost no one I know knows about this, and it wasn't in any school books we read. You'd think a space nuke to see if we could blow up an asteroid belt would make it into textbooks, especially when tens of thousands of people witnessed a sun in the sky at nighttime. The quote, May incident in World War II. American submarines were very good at getting away from Japanese surface ships. This was because the Japanese thought American submarines could only reach a much shallower depth than they actually could, and they could never set their depth charges to these deeper depths. Congressman Andrew May decided it would be a good idea to hold a press conference announcing this fact. From then on, the Japanese set their depth charges to these deeper depths. Quote, Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of the U.S. submarine fleet in the Pacific, estimated that May's security breach cost the United States Navy as many as 10 submarines and 800 crewmen killed in action. He said, I hear Congressman May said the Jap depth charges are not set up deep enough. He will be pleased to know that the Japs set them deeper now. Loose lips sink ships. Voyagers who worked for fur trade companies lived gross lives. Since they spent most of their time in a canoe with limited supplies, they made do with what they had. Gross stuff below. They were often missing teeth, so when they drank tea, they would shove a chunk of maple sugar in their teeth gaps and drink tea through it. When the tea was done, they would remove the sugar chunk, wrap it up, and save it for later. The number one cause of death for a voyager was complications of hernia because they carried heavy cargo on their backs. The average sack was 90 pounds, and they would make a contest out of who could carry the most. Often 3, and for the show-offs, 4 packs. That's 360 pounds of cargo, so of course, guts would herniate. They would tie their sashes as tight as possible around their stomach to keep all their internal organs in place. Since they try to keep limited supplies so they could carry the most cargo, they would often use their toques as bowls. They would wax the yarn to waterproof the hats, so they would eat out of their hat that had hair, sweat, skin, and probably bugs in it. They didn't pull over to the shore to go to the bathroom. When you had to go, you would go over the side of the canoe. This applies for both number 1s and number 2s. So if you had to poop, you were pooping in front of the rest of your crew. Their hygiene was awful. They often would not bathe or clean themselves up, as it protected their skin from bugs and the sun. When they got close to a rendezvous point, they would somewhat attempt to shave and clean themselves up. They made do with what they had, but learning about them has made me appreciate modern amenities like showers, toilets, and access to health and dental care. Edit, holy crap, I got gold. I know this is cliche, but thank you. Here's some quick fun Voyager facts as a thank you. They paddled about 50 strokes per minute, and the person who could carry a tune and played the fiddle were paid the best. They used music to keep pace and move faster. In Canada, there were 2 main fur trade companies, Hudson Bay Company and Northwest Company. Those 2 companies hated each other and would get in fights all the time. Turf wars were a real thing. They were often under 5'7" because having tall people in the canoe made it difficult, and it was harder work for tall people because it took more effort to swing the paddle down. And lastly, this song, Chevalier de la Table Ronde, translated to Knights of the Round Table, was their jam. It's about when they die, they want to be buried with all the wine and their head under a tap. Gross party animals to the end. It's a bit more recent, but I love the story of Gander. After 9/11, all the planes were grounded. Almost 7,000 people, which was about 66% of the local population, were forced to land in this tiny town of Gander, Newfoundland. The whole town worked together to make sure all the passengers would have everything they needed. The local ice rink was filled with frozen food that people donated. You couldn't find a closed door in town for stranded people to take a shower or just talk. Once the grounding of planes was lifted, those passengers pooled their money together and created a scholarship for the people of Gander to use. This is one of the greatest acts of kindness that I can view in history. To this day, Gander is the only place outside the United States where they have a piece of the World Trade Center. This is the story of the biggest troll who ever lived. In World War II, There was a Spanish spy named Juan Pujol Garcia who approached the Allies to work for them. When they refused, he approached the Nazis, and they accepted him, giving him the codename Arabelle. Once he earned credentials working as a Nazi spy, he approached the Allies again, this time getting a job as a double agent, codenamed Garbo. This is where it gets unbelievable. He fed the Germans a combination of misinformation, true but useless information, and high-value information that always got to the Germans just a little too late. He even started a spy network consisting of 27 sub-agents of his own. Keep in mind that not a single one of these sub-agents existed. They were completely imaginary. But regardless, he submitted expense reports for them and had the Nazis giving him money to pay their salaries. At one point, when he had to explain why some high-value information got to the Germans late, he told them that one of his spies had died. He actually got the Germans to pay the imaginary spy's imaginary wife a very real pension for her loss. Not only did his false information get the Nazis to waste millions of dollars, but he was also instrumental in convincing the Nazis that the attacks on D-Day were just a diversion, and the real attack was yet to come, keeping vital German resources away from the front lines. He is one of the only people to ever get an Iron Cross from the Germans, which required Hitler's personal authorization since he wasn't a soldier, and an MBE from King George VI. The Battle of Attu. It was the only battle of World War II fought on US soil. Attu is an island in the Aleutians. The Japanese invaded it intending to… who the heck knows, it was far too remote to serve as a staging for an invasion of the mainland. The American soldiers who were sent there had originally been slated to go to North Africa. They were sent to the Arctic, in the spring, with gear meant for fighting in the desert. They lost more men to the elements than to the Japanese. I'm a nurse, and a few years ago I had a resident who was in this battle. To his dying day, he was reluctant to talk about it, even 70 years later. What I shared here is all he would tell me. Peter the Great often forced dwarves to get married, and him and his friends would get drunk and attend the wedding. He had a fascination with dwarves, and he once forced someone who had made him angry to marry a dwarf. Edit: since this post is getting a lot of attention, I thought I'd share that Peter basically had a fraternity, and it was called the all-joking, all-drunken synod of fools and jesters. They would drink and party basically all the time. You can find more about it on Wikipedia. During World War II, the Japanese outfitted special planes. Some were designed to be launched from submarines, with enough range to reach the west coast of the United States. The goal was to use incendiary bombs to start wildfires in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. One pilot, Nobuo Fujita, successfully dropped his bombs over the forest near Brookings, Oregon. Fortunately, a storm the night before had dampened the forest, and the fire started by Fujita's bomb was quickly controlled by the Forest Service. 18 years later, in 1962, Fujita returned to Brookings. He brought with him his family's heirloom, a katana that was over 400 years old. Fujita apologized to the townspeople for his actions during the war and revealed that if the townspeople demanded it, he would ceremoniously kill himself, commit seppuku, with the sword to make reparations for his actions. The townspeople would have none of it. Fujita was made an honorary citizen of the town and returned to visit it several times during his life, including one trip to plant trees in the forest he had bombed decades before. After his death in 1997, his daughter returned to Brookings and scattered some of his ashes there. The Fujita family katana is on display in Brookings, after being given to the town by Fujita as a token of friendship. I may not be too much of a history buff, but I really like the story of Leo Major. Leo was a Canadian soldier serving in World War II. He was assigned to the division in charge of liberating the Netherlands. One day in the summer of 1944, he was alone on reconnaissance duty when he saw two German soldiers walking nearby. He killed one and captured the other, then captured their commanding officer and an entire German garrison after killing a couple more. He came under fire from other German soldiers and just kept walking. He single-handedly captured 93 German soldiers. In February of 1945, a truck Leo was in hit a landmine. He broke his back, a few ribs, and both ankles, and was told he would be discharged. Leo couldn't give enough craps, however, and a week later, he snuck out of the field hospital he was in and stayed with the Dutch family. After getting better, he made it back into his battalion and volunteered to do reconnaissance on the city of Zwolle. Once he departed, he decided to take the city himself. He convinced a German soldier to relay a message back to the German army, then through the night ran around the town making all the noise he could. He shot bullets, threw grenades, captured German soldiers, burned down the Gestapo, and cleaned out the SS building in Zwolle. His tactics were so effective, he convinced the German army that the entire Canadian army was invading the town, so by the morning, the town was free of Germans and the Canadian army just marched in. He has a street named after him in that town now. From Wikipedia, he declined the invitation to be decorated because according to him, General Montgomery, who was to give the award, was, quote, incompetent and in no position to be giving out medals. I like the cut of this guy's jib. Diarrhea was so widespread and common in the 19th century that people would develop opium habits because opium makes you constipated. Edit, well that escalated quickly, and for the exact diseases and reasons that people had diarrhea, I can only say that the 19th century was gross and nobody knew proper sanitary practices. I'm glad you guys all enjoyed debating Imodium, and today I learned Imodium is made from opiates. If you want to learn more about opium, diarrhea, or the combination of the two, then Google it because I'm busy and Google has better resources than I. I've told this story before, but it never fails to amuse me. Strap in, boys and girls. It's time to learn about that time in pre-revolutionary France where bleeding from your anus was a fashion statement. In early 1685, King Louis XIV of France developed a fistula, a small channel near his anus, resulting in great pain. Fistulas, much like the Wu-Tang Clan, ain't nothing to screw with. Eventually, the pain got so bad that he couldn't ride a horse, sit for long periods, which is kind of important when you're a king, or even make a bowel movement without regretting it immensely. The normal remedies were applied, enemas and poultices from morning until night with zero effect. Louis decided, you know what? Screw it. Let's go down the surgical route. Unfortunately for Louis, at the time, there was no surgical route. He hired a surgeon barber named Charles-Francois Félix and asked him to fix him. Not entirely stupid, and not willing to risk screwing up a novel surgery on the King of France, Félix requested 6 months to practice, which he did on prisoners. Live healthy prisoners. Sometimes as many as 4 a week, in an era where antiseptics and anesthetics didn't exist. The success rates were about as you'd imagine, although at least some of the prisoners survived, and eventually Félix felt confident enough to perform the surgery on the king. And it worked! Within 3 months, the king was riding his horse like nothing had happened, and Félix was the talk of the town. People were desperate to emulate the king so badly that people who were entirely healthy would pay Félix to perform the surgery on them, and those less willing to suffer, or at least less willing to pay, would fake having the surgery, wearing bandages known as les royales to mimic the king, and pretend that they too were cool and with it, even though with it meant suffering from a painful condition of the anus. When Philip of Macedon had ravaged many Greek city-states, things were looking bad for Greece. He then turned his attention to Sparta, sending the doomed state a letter that read, "You are advised to submit without further delay, for if I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." The Spartans sent back a rather to-the-point reply, "If." It's actually more cool even than that. That was the second message of that particular exchange. In the first, Philip asked the Spartans whether he should come to Sparta as a friend or as a foe. Their reply? Neither. Robert Liston, 1794 to 1847. A surgeon. In fact, he was described as, quote, the fastest knife in the West End, and could amputate a leg in 2.5 minutes. The faster the surgery, the more likely the recovery. Though during this particular amputation, he went so quickly he also removed his patient's testicles. However, he also amputated a man's leg in less than 2.5 minutes, who would later die of gangrene. In his haste, he accidentally cut off his assistant's fingers, who would later die from gangrene, and, apparently, cut through the coattails of a surgical spectator who was so scared he died of fright. This becoming the only surgery with a 300% mortality rate. Was he performing a surgery with a broadsword or something? It's time for the most ambitious crossover in the world. The Battle for Schlossiter, or Castle-iter. If anyone told you that tankers from the 12th Armored Division of the United States fought alongside German Wehrmacht soldiers led by an SS Hauptsturmführer, as well as French POWs to defend a castle with the famous tennis player of the time, 2 former prime ministers of France, and Charles de Gaulle's sister, against an attacking force of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, you'd have called BS upon BS upon BS. but that is exactly what happened. In a small castle near Idar in Austria, the high-profile prisoners were segregated in the latter part of the war. In May, a prisoner escaped with a letter to Allied forces detailing the names and location of the high-value imprisoned French citizens. The first Allied unit he encountered was unable to effect a rescue, but started toward the prison before retreating back behind Allied lines. During this time, the head of the prison died under, quote, mysterious circumstances, and the second-in-command deserted, along with the host of SS guards. The prisoners, meanwhile, had taken over the prison and commandeered the arms left behind. In the nearby town, Wehrmacht troops, sick of the war and the Nazis, had deserted and formed a resistance unit that protected the citizens from Nazi hardline loyalists and SS retaliation. Major Joseph Sepp Gangl approached a unit of the 12th Armored under a flag of truce and requested aid. Captain John Lee agreed immediately, positioning his tanks at the city square as a show of force. Advised of the tenuous situation in the former prison, Lee set off with a number of tanks, but was unable to cross a small rickety bridge leading to Castle Idar with all his forces. He proceeded with this tank, the Besseton Jenny, 2 squads of riflemen, Major Gangl, and a truck with a 10-man Wehrmacht Kannonkocher crew. On the way, they encountered a group of SS troops attempting to blockade the road, who they promptly ventilated. Arriving at the castle, the captain and the major were greeted by the unlikely sight of French prisoners working side by side with Hauptsturmführer Kurt Siegfried Schrader to shore up the castle defenses. The motley crew was not best pleased with the, quote, rescue force that didn't even quite make up a full platoon, but were happy to see any reinforcement. Lee staged his tank at the castle entrance, and the POWs, the Wehrmacht, and the 12th Armored Crew deployed around the castle into defensive perimeter. The crap was on. The next morning, a Waffen-SS group numbering over 100 launched their assault, one of the opening salvos destroying the tank that had been the heavy weapon support for the Castle Idar defenders. The attack continued in waves, with probing during the night to find weakness in the defenders' lines. Even after being ordered by Captain Lee to seek shelter in the castle, the French POWs stayed on the front, pouring a heavy volume of fire at the attacking SS troops. Morning after pillbox, the following day opened bleakly, with sporadic gunfire continuing throughout the night, as well as repeated grenade blasts and 88mm cannon fire. The defenders were running low on ammo. Somehow, the telephone lines back to the nearby town had not been destroyed, and comms remained intact for the duration of the battle. Lee and Gangl called back for the reinforcements, and they arrived in the afternoon to stomp a mud hole in SS butt. The strangest battle of an insane war came to a close. It was 5 days after the Führer died from self-inflicted high-velocity lead poisoning, and 2 days before the official surrender of Germany. Reddit, what's the craziest freaking thing you have ever witnessed in real life with your own 2 eyes? When I was a teenager, I remember being in Indianapolis waiting on a stoplight to turn green when multiple police cars went flying by with their lights on and sirens screaming. They blocked the road off right in front of me with their cruisers, and a few officers jumped out. One officer ran behind a car that was stopped in the mall entrance drive, and once he was behind the vehicle, it immediately reversed and tried to run over the cop. The driver bailed and started to run before turning around and whipping out a gun, at which point the police shot him multiple times right then and there, and he dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Most incredible thing I have ever witnessed in my life, even to this day. What's your story? At a clothing option beach a few years ago, I saw a woman roll onto the beach in a human-sized hamster ball. She took off her shirt and I thought, that woman has remarkably large breast implants. She then took off her pants and I thought, that woman has a remarkably large woohoo! She continued to roll the ball around the beach for about 20 minutes while another woman filmed her before rolling back off the beach. I knew, at that moment, that I would never see anything stranger in my entire life. I still feared that I am in the background of some sort of trans hamster ball fetish adult film. Diving at about 80 feet in Molokini Crater off Maui, I was looking at a reef when felt something smack my tank from behind. I looked up and my dive buddy's eyes were like saucers. The bump was from one of 3 bottlenose dolphins. They circled around us for a few minutes, then darted away. We were just awestruck in 80 feet of water with 30 pounds of gear while these amazing animals had a good time around us. Humbling. Just be glad they had a good time by themselves and not with you because, dolphins are scary. Like, worse than sharks scary. Trust me. One of my friends pulled himself up on top of what looked like a raised concrete platform. Turned out to be a vat of cow poop with a crusted layer on top. He got on top of the outside wall, took one step, and fell through and nearly drowned in liquid cow poop, vomited everywhere, jumped into a nearby river fully clothed to get it off. I have a couple. 1. Downtown Vancouver. In line for a bar at about 11:30 p.m. Homeless guy walks by me, about 20 feet, drops his pants, and takes the wettest poop I've ever seen right on the sidewalk. 2. High school. Hanging out with a friend in his bedroom. He gets into a fight with his dad. Dad barges into room, and my friend simultaneously shuts the door. On his finger. Finger came off. Now that I think about it, I live a pretty sheltered life. Thanks, Western civilization! My weirdest experience was also in Indianapolis. I was sitting at a light in a convertible, and a truck driver pulls up and shouts, "Hey, y'all want some mayonnaise?" And then picks up a huge 64-ounce plus container of mayo and throws it at me. Thankfully, I caught it. Could have gone horribly awry, though. Still to this day, I don't know why this happened. Edit, reoccurring question, not only did I eat the mayo, I was on my way to a cookout, so a lot of people ate it. I saw the 2008 Toronto propane explosion happen from my 19th floor apartment balcony about 5 kilometers away. Seeing the sky go orange and feeling heat hit you like a truck from several kilometers away freaked me out. I wondered if it was a terrorist attack and who Canada could have ticked off. I was on vacation with my family in San Francisco. 2 homeless men got into a shouting match. One yelled, "Chew on this!" Rushed a flock of pigeons, grabbed one in his hands, and hurled it at the other homeless man. The other man caught the pigeon in one hand, he had a trumpet in the other, and yelled back, "Respect all God's creatures!" and tossed it into the air. The pigeon flew away, and the man resumed playing his trumpet. Time for a gross medical story. I worked in the ER for almost 2 years. I was a scribe. This meant I followed around the doctors and took notes for them. Before seeing a patient, we would get a vague idea of why the person was in the ER by reading their chief complaint. We'd also either read the nurse's note or talk with the nurse who checked them in. We were going to see a patient with the chief complaint of, quote, skin rash, generally a pretty benign complaint. As we headed over to the room, we were stopped by the nurse who checked them in. "You're going to need a mask," she said. "What's going on?" the doctor asked. It's difficult to describe. You'll see it when you get in there. But the smell is pretty bad. You should wear a mask." She was silent for a moment. I worked in the ER for 30 years. I've never seen anything like that. We put on some masks and entered the patient's room. The stench was pretty bad, even with the masks on. The patient was an older woman. "What brings you in today?" the physician asked. "Well, I've got something going on under my left breast," the woman stated. "Okay, why don't we take a look at it?" The doctor moved the woman's gown aside to look at her breast. The woman pointed to under the breast. The doctor asked her to lift her breast. This is where the craziest thing I've ever seen comes in. As she lifted the breast, I realized something was not right. She kept lifting it, further than you really should be able to. Instead of normal pink flesh under the breast, I saw a decaying gray mess with a tinge of green, and then a rib. And then I realized I was essentially looking into this woman's chest. As she lifted the breast, it was like the hinge opening a door into her insides. Not much was identifiable, but the doctor did point out a huge mass that was essentially coming out from the breast. The doctor explained to me after we left the room that this woman had extremely late-stage breast cancer. The cancer had become so large it had started invading the chest wall, breaking down skin, muscle, anything that came in the way. That was why her skin had broken down under the breast. She also most likely had local fungal and bacterial infections in the decaying tissue, which was where most of the smell came from. Ugh, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Apparently, the woman was not a huge fan of doctors and just avoided coming in for about a year. She hid it from her family. I just cannot imagine living with that. And that's my story. Driving through Cleveland, I saw a naked, fat, homeless man rolling around on the sidewalk as some super skinny woman with just pants and a do-rag, no shirt or bra, was screaming at him and kicking him as he rolled down the street. Na 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 katamari damashi. I was in New York City for a meeting with a coworker in June of this past year. Since it was an amazing day out, we decided to have our meeting out in one of the local parks since it was an informal meeting and both of us wanted to enjoy the weather. After spending the morning going through our business, we both decided on lunch. Before we left, I needed to find a restroom. There was a public restroom in this park. It was well maintained and clean, but really busy. Since all the urinals were taken up, I stepped into a stall and did my business. As I am leaving the stall, I am careful to not swing the door open quickly since there were quite a few people in the restroom. Since I am stepping out slowly, I happen to notice a guy walk in wearing an apron for one of the local coffee places nearby. He walks up to a single urinal, not a trough, a single urinal that is already occupied by someone, squeezes in next to the guy, and ends up peeing on the other guy's hands. It happened so quickly that the original urinator had no idea what was happening. He backed away from the urinal, staring at his hands, screaming, "What the frick? What the frick?" The guy with the coffee apron never stopped peeing, and just said over and over, "Sorry, man." The guy who got peed on threw a punch in the crowded bathroom, and the coffee apron guy still never stopped peeing. I decided I did not want to be in that bathroom any longer and quickly snuck out. TLDR, you are never supposed to share a single urinal with another dude. Legend says that he's still peeing to this day. Man, I gotta say that the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life has to be somebody who isn't subscribed to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. I've seen a lot of weird things in my current job. This morning, a guy walked in with a snake around his neck explaining that people called him, quote, Rhinestone Terry, because his woohoo had bumps on it when he got erect. There was an Asian guy that fixed cars behind our shop. He only worked on other Asians' cars in our area. On our DVR, we had tons of videos of his customers peeing or taking a dump in the parking lot. Also had video of his wife scooping dog poop on our back door. I genuinely don't know what it is with all the poop in this episode, I'm sorry. One time there was a transvestite that came in here and walked straight to the front corner of our store. He dropped his pants and started jerking off while looking at us. My boss got a piece of conduit and poked him until he left. We used to fly a big balloon, kind of like what you see at car dealerships. It was an attempt to get attention and increase business. One day I was outside and had just finished filling up the balloon. I tied it off and was starting to walk back inside when a woman asked me, "How did you get that balloon up there? Helicopter?" There used to be an emergency vet next door. They were only open at night when the other vets were closed. A woman showed up in the middle of the day and shoved a truck bed full of animal organs out on their front door. Her reason was that they might need the, quote, parts. I saw two homeless guys get into a fight about 8 years ago when I first started this job. One of them pushed the other one out in front of a car passing by and killed him. He threw up his arms and screamed, "There can only be one!" My friend told me it wasn't a Highlander fight because it wasn't in a warehouse. Over the years, I've seen a lot of people crap themselves in my store. Just last week, an old man needed to use the bathroom. Before he got to the bathroom, he pulled his pants off in the store in front of people. I had to carry a computer out to this fat woman's car. When we got to the car, I put the machine in the back seat next to a kid that was eating Wendy's chili. She started crying and said that she had crapped herself. She then looked at her child and said, "It's in my coochie." He then threw up all over the back seat. I watched a guy stand about 200 feet away from our front door on the sidewalk and talk to no one. He then came in with a gun and wanted to know why we wouldn't show him any respect by talking back to him. I had a customer off themselves in a parking lot because he couldn't play World of Warcraft on a 15-year-old laptop. This was after he threw the laptop at me and I chased him out with a hammer. I saw a guy lay on his back and pee into the air while waiting for his ride across the street in a parking lot. I could go on forever with these. Take a hike to Big Bill Hells, home of challenge peeing. My mom took me to get my hair cut at a salon when I was a 13-year-old boy. I usually get my hair cut at the barber, but we didn't have the time. So, this petite gay guy is talking nice and cutting my hair. Next to me is this 14-year-old chick looking kinda cute. She has two huge gay guys cutting her hair. I'm 6'2" and 240 pounds, and I was about that size when I was 13. These two guys were lisping and snipping at her long blonde hair with their tight black shirts and huge arms. 10 minutes into her haircut, the guys cutting her hair start barking at each other that the other was cutting her hair wrong. These two huge gay guys start throwing fists and connecting with on each other's face. One stabs the other with a scissor in the arm. Blood is everywhere. The petite gay guy cutting my hair gets between me and the brawl, gets some blood on him, and gets hit in the face. The fight gets broken up, the one guy goes to the hospital, and my haircut was free of charge. That was way more exciting than the barber. I used to do security and landed a gig at the Teen Choice Awards. I landed the very best position that night, guarding some high-powered confetti blowers right next to the stage. I was underneath the section of the stage that rose up and the announcer stood. I saw every star from just a few feet away from them. Some older dude sitting near me kept turning around and later told me most of the girls here aren't wearing panties. I wasn't wearing my glasses, so it was pointless for me to stare out into the crowd. I hear them announce Megan Fox coming up to present the next award and look upwards as she walks into position. She wasn't wearing panties. I've seen numerous accidents, knife fights, you name it, but Mother Nature kicked all their butts this year. We were down in Baja at a beach called Los Cerritos. I was in knee-deep water with my daughter when someone yelled, "Whale!" Usually this means someone spotted a spout or something, so I'm thinking, no big deal. Well, a second or two, someone else yelled, so I looked up and there they were. A huge gathering of humpback whales, breaching, dancing, tail wagging. I've seen this before, but never in these numbers. Then, instead of watching the show slowly swim away, they stayed. Those whales stayed in that same spot playing for well over 20 minutes. It was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed, and I've been around. A few years ago, I was in Boston visiting some friends and went outside to smoke a cigarette. I'm standing on the sidewalk enjoying the autumn chill, and two cars screeched to a halt in front of me. Neither moved for a minute, and so I didn't think anything of it. Just odd. Then, from seemingly out of nowhere, two cops come running at the cars with their guns drawn. The cops were screaming, "Mother effer, let me see your hands! Don't move!" All kinds of deliciously profane things to shout in the middle of the day in the middle of a city. They slapped the hood of the first car and yelled at the driver to take off and then stood on opposite sides of the rear car, their guns aimed through the windows and still screaming. A few moments later, about 10 cop cars pull up, lights and sirens, and cops start piling out with their guns drawn, a couple with shotguns that they racked and then leveled at the car. I was about 20 feet away, but none of them even seemed to notice. I wasn't told to back away or anything. As this is happening, a small crowd began to gather. So, since I'm on the passenger side, I couldn't see the driver. The cops open the door on my side and pull out the passenger. He was a normal-looking guy, white guy in t-shirt and jeans, and they lay him down on the road, cuff him, and take him off to the squad car. So far, pretty interesting. Then they take the driver out and lay him on the ground, but since he's on the other side of the car, I still can't see him. Cops then start pulling things out of the car and putting them on the hood. Bottles of pills, a backpack, and then a gun. This is getting more interesting. Then, as we are all standing in rapt attention, this huge cop, black, probably 6'5" and about 300 pounds, reaches down to pick up the driver. He does so with one hand, and we all stand in amazement as we realize the driver is a midget and is dangling from the hands of this gigantic cop. The midget is screaming at the top of his lungs, "Screw you, cops! Blah, blah, blah!" And the cop pretty much carries him one-handed to his squad car and throws him in the back. When the cruiser takes off, there was a moment of silence, and then everyone, probably 30 bystanders, a dozen cops, everyone, starts laughing hysterically at the same time. I called every single person I knew, just so that I would not be accused of making it up. It was hands down the funniest thing I have seen. TLDR, I saw a midget get arrested at gunpoint. There was much communal laughter. I live in Philadelphia, and I was walking up Broad Street, one of the main thoroughfares in the city. All of a sudden, I hear sirens, which isn't that unusual, and I see a cop racing down the street, which also isn't that unusual. But then I see a Jeep, oblivious to this cop, start to cross Broad. At about this time, I got the, "oh crap, this is going to end horrendously" face and stopped to watch. Well, the Jeep gets about halfway across the street when the cop, who is doing at least 65 to 70, broadsides the Jeep, goes airborne, and flips end over end twice and then lands upside down. While the cop is flipping over, the Jeep is doing a barrel roll, also airborne, but underneath the cop, and this is where it reaches the point of peak insanity. After the cop lands, the Jeep lands on top of the cop, and it's like one giant pile of twisted metal, broken glass, and shredded rubber. A few seconds later, all of the other cops, who were racing to the same crime scene as the first, come barreling down Broad. They all screech to a halt, jump out of their cars with their guns drawn as if the driver of the Jeep was some mastermind terrorist bent on murdering the Philadelphia police force. OSU Michigan football game in Columbus, 2005 or 2006, I forget. After the Bucks won, I stepped onto the porch with a few friends to have a smoke. As soon as I get outside, it smells like smoke. Sure enough, there was a 7-foot-high stack of porch furniture on fire right in front of the house I was at in the middle of the road. The fire really begins to grow as dozens of people are continuing to toss more and more couches and chairs onto this inferno. Now, keep in mind, all of this takes place in a little under 1 minute. Out of nowhere, a city snowplow comes flying out of the alleyway and crushes the whole pile down to nothing and scatters it all over the road and alley. Cheers erupt from all the neighboring houses at the scene, loving the hysteria that is going on around them. All of a sudden, a huge beam of light shines down right under the street, followed by another as 2 police helicopters swoop across the area. Then, almost immediately after all of this crap is going down, a wall of police on horseback arrive. I mean, these guys own the street sidewalk to sidewalk, batons in hand, just swatting at anyone stupid enough to get in their way. They marched right down the street and dispersed the area in less than 1 minute. No one was injured. Best thing I've ever seen. One time, I was in this pretty important business meeting. There was a town involved, regarding company acquisitions for an organization which I was led to believe I had no ownership in. After investigating some fraudulence on the part of my, quote, business partners, I determined I had actually still owned 50% of the company. Having known this, as the purchasing entity had no knowledge, I sold him 500,000 units of my product before the deal went through and then refused to sell him the company, saving my town and my dad's company. That's not even the crazy part. After I revealed that a married couple in the meeting had committed fraud, the husband ran out into the testing floor, it was an auto brakes factory, and tried to escape. But while telling us to screw ourselves, he tripped and fell onto an active brake test car and accidentally flipped the switch to activate it. Needless to say, we were all pretty worried about the poor guy, but fortunately, the brakes actually worked. But the guy went flying into a chair which was being tested for durability impact. One of these giant punching bag-like weights landed directly on his balls, ensuring he would never be able to reproduce again. That's still not even the crazy part. The craziest part is that the wife of the guy who committed fraud decided to shack up with the owner of the original purchasing company immediately as they left the meeting room, and no one even thought to arrest her or anything. This is after she committed multiple accounts of fraud, maybe even attempted murder and polygamy. Although this happened right in front of news cameras and police officers, but she was, quote, like a 10, so I guess it was okay. For those not getting it, IMDb Tommy Boy. And I've been reading a movie reference this whole time. Okay, never mind then. You know how sometimes when you can see/hear someone committing an act of douchebaggery, your immediate reaction is wishing they get exactly what's coming to them? Well, one night I was sitting on a bench outside a train station, and I can hear this guy driving like a real jerkwad. I can't see him yet, but I can tell from the sounds that he's doing burnouts and donuts and the like on the public street next to the building. I say to myself, I hope that jerkwad wrecks his car. And as soon as I get out the word car, I look up and see him come screaming around the side of the building and slam his car head-on into a telephone pole. It wasn't particularly crazy by conventional standards, but the timing of it was just insane. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.